Hey guys, what's up, welcome. What if Naruto x Karui x Harem movie? When one thinks of the word reincarnation, what is it that mostly pops up in your mind? Is it the ability to gain new powers the likes you haven't before? Or maybe it is somehow something to do with time travel of some sort. The word reincarnation in our language means the rebirth of a soul in a new body, but we are only human, so what exactly do we know in the grand cosmic scheme of things? At the dawn of time, when light and darkness was all that existed, an entity that became known as the Absolute Being split the light to create the group known as the rulers, and split the darkness to create their polar opposites, the monarchs, as the monarchs were born to destroy the world, given they were made from the darkness, and the rulers were born to protect it, given they were the opposite. It wasn't long before they engaged in a devastating war with each other. After eons of endless war with no victory in sight, the rulers asked the Absolute Being to give them the strength to extinguish the monarchs for good and finally put an end to the bloodshed. However, the Absolute Being did not reply, and it was at that moment that the rulers realized that their war with the monarchs was mere entertainment to him. And that the Absolute Being did not want the war to end. This fact, along with the realization that the war would never end as long as the Absolute Being was alive, led 7 of the 8 rulers to rebel against their god. One, who bore the name Ashborn, the last and strongest ruler, was the only one who remained loyal and tried his best to stop them, but they defeated him and left him for dead, now with no one left to oppose them in their revolution. The rulers marched into the throne room and speared the Absolute Being to death. Ashborn would later find the god's corpse still sitting on his throne, with the ruler's sword sticking out of his chest and neck. As his injuries in his fight against the other rulers were fatal, Ashborn believed that it was the end for him and prepared for death, a deep-rooted feeling of regret for not being there to protect his master flowing through him. However, before he could die, he discovered that the Absolute Being had hidden a monstrous power inside his body and promptly activated it. Transforming himself into what would be named the Shadow Monarch, now back to full health and even stronger than he was before his fight with his former brethren, Ashborn returned to the battlefront to continue the fight, but by the time he got back, he found out that he was too late, as the rebellion was already over and the Absolute Being was already dead. He would question just why was it that his master had done nothing to stop his own demise, and yet he never would get the answer to his question, since the only one who could answer it was dead right in front of him. After the rulers captured Legia, one of the strongest monarchs within their members, Ashborn realized that the monarchs would lose if he didn't step in and decided to offer his help, an offer that they quickly accepted, given they had lost one of their strongest and needed the strength to fill in that gap. Unfortunately for Ashborn, however, even though he managed to stabilize the power balance and keep the war going, his overwhelming powers came to earn him great fear from both sides and eventually led 2 monarchs, Beast and Baron, to betray him and ambush him with their armies, although Ashborn easily defeated both monarchs and killed Baron in retaliation for his treachery. His own army did not hold up well and was nearly annihilated. Right after he killed Baron, the rulers descended in front of Ashborn and asked him for his forgiveness, although Ashborn initially refused to accept their gesture of peace and furiously demanded that they kill him so that they could finally win the war. The rulers persisted in their plea, and Ashborn was so emotionally overwhelmed that he couldn't give them an answer. Deciding to seek revenge against the Beast Monarch instead, Ashborn left the battlefield and went into hiding to rebuild his army, allowing the rulers to finally defeat the monarchs and force them into hiding. At some point after this, however, Ashborn returned to the monarchs in Antares. The strongest monarch was quick to welcome him back to their ranks. As 2 of the monarchs were lost and the rest were still greatly weakened from their loss against the rulers. Centuries later, when the monarchs launched their assault on the human world once more as they had done in the past, Ashborn followed them out of his own desire to find his place in the universe, as he never felt like he belonged in the chaos world. At the same time, he also started looking for a suitable human vessel with the help of a servant known as the Architect and spent years searching with little luck until he came across a human named Sung Jinwoo. This man would later on become not his vessel, but his successor, and Sung Jinwoo would go on to defeat the monarchs so as to save the human world from their destruction. Once the fight was all over and the dust had settled, it was only then that the young man had seen just what this war had cost him. So many of his friends along with so many innocent people had died in this insane war. He wished he could fix it so that no one would have to suffer like this. And just as he wished for it, the rulers appeared before him with a magical item known as the Cup of Reincarnation. The cup was first created eons ago by the Absolute Being, but for what reason the rulers had no clue. After the rulers murdered him for his cruelty towards them, they took his place as the new gods and stole his tools for themselves, including the cup. They never looked into why this cup existed, only on what it did. As for what it did, it reversed time by about 10 years. Centuries later, or the present time, when their first attempt to prevent the monarchs from destroying the human world failed, the rulers used the cup to rewind time 10 years back and give themselves another chance. Unfortunately, this only prolonged what seemed inevitable, as the human world would always be destroyed, regardless of which side won the war. Even worse. Despite the fact that it was created by God himself, the cup's power was not infinite, and as a result, the rulers eventually realized that it was starting to wear out. 10 years before the events that led to Sung Jin-woo standing here victorious before them, the rulers turned to their last resort by spawning the various gates, portals to other dimensions filled with monsters of all sorts, and exposing mankind to the existence of magic beasts. This way, it would only take a few years for the human world to be saturated with enough mana to withstand the brunt of their war with the monarchs, unlike all the other times they had failed to save the human race. Also, assuming that they won the war, the rulers would no longer have to use the cup. After he defeated Antares, the very leader of the monarchs themselves, Sung Jin-woo had asked the rulers to use the cup of reincarnation one last time, so that he could bring back all the people he lost in the war with the monarchs, although the rulers had warned him that no one would remember him if he did this, and that they were doomed if he failed. As the cup only had enough power left for one last run, Jin-woo remained adamant in his decision, realizing that Jin-woo intended on carrying on everything by himself. The rulers wished him the best of luck and used the cup one last time, completely exhausting its power and sending them all 10 years back into the past for the last time. At least that was what was supposed to happen. Never once had the rulers wondered or questioned why this cup existed, not once, and because of that they never knew the curse that had been put on the item by the very person who had made the thing. If one was to look at the absolute being's demise from an outside perspective, one would question just how did he allow it to happen. This god, this absolute being that had made the universe, was in fact killed by his own creations. It didn't seem likely given he didn't even fight back. He had just been skewered on his own throne, his body left to rot there. The answer to that was simple. The cup of reincarnation. He had always known that one if not both factions he had made to fight one another would turn against him, and thus he made the cup to turn back time, so as to find a means to stop his own death if it ever came to that. And he had used the cup numerous times, and yet no matter what he had actually done, things never worked out the way he wanted, with either his own death or the destruction of all things which he didn't want. Since then he would be alone and bored, so after experiencing this time and time again, he had simply let what happened happen, but not before cursing the very item he had used. When he had made it, it was known as the Cup of Reversal, hence why it was able to turn back time, but after cursing it, it became the Cup of Reincarnation, and its uses were limited. Basically it was the absolute being's way of saying fuck you to his own creations. He knew that at some point one of the factions would find and use the cup, and by reversing time they would prolong their war. The cup would diminish in use since he himself was no longer around to keep it powered, and with its final use, the cup's actual power, the curse he placed upon it, would activate. So at that moment, with Sung Jin-woo activating the Cup of Reincarnation for the final time, time did not turn back as he had expected. No, he was reborn into a new body, his abilities as well as his memories sealed like the absolute being had planned to do to his creations. But since the seal was meant to work on either the rulers or the monarchs, and the shadow monarch was not something he took into account when the curse was placed, since he had forgotten all about giving Ashbourne that power. The seal on his power would weaken with time. Given the sheer godlike power the Shadow Monarch wielded both as Ashbourne as well as when reborn through Sung Jin-woo, the very fate of the world itself would be influenced by the actions taken against the one who would eventually unlock this power. And unfortunately for the people of the new time and dimension that Sung Jin-woo was reincarnated into, the people of the village his new body had been born into were currently attacking his weak defenseless form. This did not bode well for the world in the slightest. Present-day Konoha, Elemental Continent. This is the story of a child, one whose destiny was unknown to all, even to himself, but while the child may be small now, he would become a powerful ruler in the future. Whether his rule was benevolent or tyrannical only time could tell. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze was born on October 10th, a day that haunted not only him, but the people who lived in the village. He unfortunately found himself residing within as well. On this day, he was born, and his birth weakened his mother, so that the demon she had sealed within her many years ago broke free from its seal and began to wreak havoc across the place. His father had fought off the demon, yet even with him doing so, there was so much damage done to the village as well as many lives being lost, which ended with his father's as well as his mother's, so within less than a day of being born, this poor child was now orphaned. The demon did not want to be sealed away once again like it was before and tried to kill the newborn baby so as to stop any attempts to reseal him, yet the child's mother blocked the attack at the cost of her own life, and she died proclaiming her love for her newborn child, being the last words that left her mouth. His father had sacrificed his own soul itself to summon up the god of death so as to form a seal that placed the demon into his son. His final words were to the previous leader of the village Hiruzen to make sure the village saw Naruto as a hero. But Hiruzen had no intention to heed his final words. The man had taken one look at Naruto and had smirked with a smile full of greed. He didn't care for the now dead man's words. He wanted a weapon, a tool to use against any and all threats the village would face in the future. So while he would allow the boy to live, it would be something less than human in his eyes. Naruto's life from that moment on was nothing short of hell, as Hiruzen allowed the villagers of Konoha to hurt the child in retaliation to what the demon had done to their homes, as well as the countless people it had killed. Hiruzen allowed this to happen so as to play the caring grandfather role and enforce the boy's loyalty to him as a weapon in the future. And his sickening plan might have worked, but things happened that he could neither plan nor expect to happen as they did. When Naruto was only 7 years old, not that you would know this given the malnutrition he was suffering through stunted his growth something fierce, he was attacked yet again as he had been many times before by a large group of villagers. They had basically dragged him against his will towards a back alley and beat him black and blue with their fists, pipes, and a 2x4 that they broke on him from overuse. Once they had their fun, they all left him to bleed out in that alley, smiling and laughing about the fun they had torturing this kid. But while they were walking away, Naruto simply waited half-conscious for whatever ability he had been blessed or cursed would heal him slowly. What he was unaware of was that the demon sealed within him. Which was another thing he had no clue about since no one had ever told him he even had such a thing within him. Healed him since if he died the demon died too. This was the way the seal keeping the demon locked away worked. But today wouldn't end like it normally did when the villagers got done with their attacks against Naruto, since at this very moment inside his body, a seal that was hidden away from everyone cracked, and from that crack the power of a hunter long since past began to unseal itself. Mindscape. Naruto woke up and looked around to see just where he was, and to his surprise he wasn't in the alley that the people had just spent the last hour beating him within an inch of his life in. He didn't recognize this place in any way, and from what he could see it looked like some sort of sewer or something. This made him question if the people dumped him down into the sewers or not. But it wasn't like he was going to get his answers just laying there, so he got up and dusted himself off. Now that he was up, the main question of which way to go became prominent in his mind. There were only two directions, and both of them led down darkish, barely lit tunnels, so he had no idea what way led to what, so he simply chose a direction and walked down it. He walked for what seemed like hours, but he didn't have any means to tell the time, given the lack of natural light. So he continued to walk wondering what awaited him at the end of this tunnel, and eventually he found out exactly what it was. Right now, he stood before a large prison of some sort. It was barred off by thick metal bars and a fairly large seal that was placed upon it. Naruto had no idea what this prison was doing here, nor did he want to know since the thing was massive, so that meant whatever was inside was larger than he could handle, so he was not going to mess with it since this way only apparently led to a prison. He would go the opposite direction in hopes of finding the way out of wherever this place was. But as he turned around to go and walk away, he was unaware of the large orange tail that snaked its way out of the prison until it was too late. Naruto felt as it grabbed hold of him and pulled him into the prison. He screamed as he was pulled in and screamed louder when he saw the thing the tail was attached to, for it belonged to a large 9-tailed fox demon. The thing roared in his face and opened its mouth to devour the child, but it was stopped by an unexpected source. Out of the darkness came a man who rushed through the air and sliced the tail that was constricting Naruto's movements. The beast roared in pain, but the man looked at the fox demon and held out his hand. The demon's roar was instantly silenced, and not only that, it was forced to lay flat on the ground like a dog does when they are submissive, once the demon was put into such a pitiful position. The man looked towards Naruto, who saw the man's eyes glowing a menacing bright purple color. The man standing there looking at him was a handsome and muscular young man with gray eyes, black hair, and sharp facial features. He wore a black dress shirt over a white one underneath that included a black tie. He wore black pants and black shoes as well. It seemed this guy was a fan of the color black, given most of what he wore was that particular color. Naruto couldn't help but think that this guy was dressed like he was going to a funeral or something. Naruto wondered if this guy was going to attack him or was he a friend, but he eventually got his answer. "So this is what we have become, has it?" said the man with a closed-eye sigh. "To think I actually used the cup and became like this. This was not the expected outcome." Said Naruto in confusion since this was out of context entirely, and he had no idea what the man was talking about. "Who are you?" "Oh," said the man with a chuckle, "sorry, I sort of needed a second there to sort some things in my mind, but as to your question you are asking the wrong one." "What do you mean?" "You ask me who I am," said the man with a smile, "when the real question to be asked is who we are." As soon as Naruto heard the man say those words, his head began to throb with a head-splitting headache beyond description. It felt like his actual soul itself was trying to break through his skull for some reason, but in that moment of pain, visions of a life he himself did not live came to him. His time spent known to the world as the weakest hunter of all mankind. His horror at seeing the deaths of many within the double dungeon. His apparent sacrifice to the statue. His rise in power as a hunter when he recovered. The missions he was sent on to grow in strength. His trip ascending the demon tower that ended with the death of the demon baron. His rise to becoming the world's strongest S-ranked hunter. The war with the monarchs. And lastly, him using the cup of reincarnation. Naruto felt as his head stopped hurting, and then he looked up at this man, since he now knew who he was, or rather who he himself was. Sung Jin-woo, said Naruto simply as he looked at his former self with awe, to think that he had been capable of such amazing feats, to see himself as he was now, being abused as he was by the people of Konoha, it only made him furious. So you remember, said Jin-woo with a smile, I actually wondered if you would. But what happened to us to make us become like this? Asked Naruto in confusion. I am wondering about that myself, said Jin-woo with a sigh. When I used the cup of reincarnation I was told I would be sent back 10 years, yet not only did that not happen, I was actually reincarnated into a whole new body in another dimension of all things, and to top it all off my power was sealed away as well. How do you know we are in another dimension? Because there are neither monarchs or rulers here, trust me when I say after being around them so much that you just know when they are around, since I don't sense them, they are not here anymore. Point taken, but don't you have any sort of clue as to why we were reborn like this? My only guess, said Jin-woo with a shrug of his shoulders, is that whoever made the cup put some sort of hidden curse on it or something, since otherwise I can't think of why this happened. So what happens now? Asked Naruto. Why are you asking me? Laughed Jin-woo, since I am nothing more than just the memory of our past, this is your mind, and I am just who we were, I have no power, nor will I continue to exist once you leave, so it is up to you on what to do. So all those things I saw you do in the past, do I have those abilities? Indeed you do, said Jin-woo with a serious tone of voice, whatever magical power brought us to this point, the same one that has sealed our power for years, it is beginning to weaken, I am guessing that time is weakening it, and now that you know about your own power, and now can access it once more, that barrier will break faster than time itself would do it. So how do I access it? Asked Naruto, who was still a bit confused on how to do so. That's easy, said Jin-woo, who was beginning to fade away from existence, his purpose fulfilled, say the words that you know deep down in your very being, now go and show the world the strength of the Shadow Monarch, and with those last words, Jin-woo ceased to be, though his body might be gone forever, his memories as well as skills would live on in his new life. Naruto stood there for a bit, all the while letting this all sink in. The fact that his past strength was coming back to him from a past life was a bit much to comprehend, but in the end, he would adapt as he had before when he had gotten said power in the first place. But now came the question on what he would do with this reacquainted power of his. The world was his playground now, given he had godlike power to do with as he wished, yet he had no idea as to what to use it for, but then out of the blue he knew without a shred of doubt what he would do. Live. That one word ignited the fires of rage that he had felt when he had first remembered his past. He had once been the most powerful man on the planet, one who saved it from an enemy that sought to wipe out humanity as a whole. Now he was a weak kid who no one respected or allowed a sliver of happiness, no more. He refused to have his neck pressed down under the heavy weight of some random fucker's boots anymore, so with a new drive to better his life in every conceivable way, he said the words that, like Jin-woo said, were deeply embedded into his very being. Arise. But that one word, the dark power that he once used in a past life flooded out of him, the demon who was still bound to the ground this entire time, perished within seconds of it being unleashed, and within its final moments, it knew the true feeling of fear. Real world. Naruto woke up back into the real world, his body feeling stronger than it had before. He wondered if what he had experienced was some sort of hallucination he suffered from brain damage, but he grabbed a thick wooden portion of the 2x4 that had been used to beat him into the ground and crushed it with his bare hand, so no, it was not a dream. Since he didn't have this type of strength before all this, he now had the strength to become the strongest person alive, but that would take some time given whatever barrier had sealed his power from the start was still there just slowly breaking apart, plus as an added bonus, whatever had happened with the seal to his power had greatly increased his intelligence, he might be only 7 in body. But his mind was of a man in his prime, this would help him immensely, since he would need to think of a proper plan here if he wanted to improve his situation. Well then, said Naruto as he hopped up back onto his feet, he took a bit of time to crack his various limbs, since his body was far more stiff than he would have liked it to be. Cracking his body felt so nice as he did it, seems like I need to figure out just what I can do at the moment, I wonder if. Naruto looked around his immediate person to see if there was something he could pick up to test something, and luckily he found a can. He picked it up and tossed it in his hand a few times before he sent it away and stored it in his inventory as he had his weapons and potions in the past. "So my inventory is still intact," said Naruto to himself with a smile. "That is good to know, but now it makes me wonder if my old gear is still in there." Naruto connected with his inventory, which was like a mental connection of sorts, since he was able to see what he had stored away without having to visibly see it. When the architect had died, he no longer had the screen from the system to look at, but the ability to store things away was still usable by him, and while Naruto still had the ability to use his inventory. Unfortunately, none of his old gear was still inside it, all there was the can he chucked in there as a test. "Well, that is a bit of a disappointment," said Naruto with a sigh. "I could have used my old weapons, but now that I think about it fully, it doesn't really matter in the end, since there are no gates in this universe, since there aren't, there is no need for magical weapons to defeat the various monsters that inhabit them. I'll need to find a proper replacement. And sweet merciful Kami, I have no idea where to get that, but what to do now?" Naruto actually stood there for a few minutes thinking heavily on what to do. It wasn't like he had a proper family to get back to like most kids, and his shitty ass apartment wasn't really something he was looking forward to going back to. Well, it was a place to lay his head at night so as to not be caught in the cold or the rain, since it had a roof, though it was one that leaked. It was the bare minimum to call a place to live, plus it also added the detriment of being a place many people who wanted to hurt him could find him to do exactly that. After a few minutes he finally thought on what to do. "I need to find a quiet place to train," said Naruto once more to himself, "since the people here will only hinder me if they think I am getting too strong. Well, I may remember what I could do in my past life, I will still need to train my body to regain my strength. Plus now that I have chakra as well as the magical abilities I had back then, that makes me question just what I can do with that knowledge. Questions for later since I need a place to train first before I test my abilities, but where is there a place to do just that? I can think of one, but I don't know if I am ready to go there." Naruto then remembered his ability to use stealth. This ability was able to camouflage him with his surroundings and hide all traces of his presence, essentially turning himself both physically and magically invisible. This would help him immensely, especially if they sent Tracker Nin in the future to find him, so now that he had the method to get places without being found. He just now needed the proper equipment to protect himself. With a plan in mind along with an ability to succeed in his plan, he set off towards the main street of the village. This was where most of the stores were, and while he walked toward it he felt his stomach grumble. It made him chuckle a bit since he had not really thought of getting food in all this, but given what he had just recently gone through it made sense. So he made a detour towards a food stall. This one sold grilled meat on a stick. The owner of the stall hated him like so many others and had stabbed him on several accounts in the past, so Naruto had no guilt as he activated his stealth ability and snatched a few skewers of meat while the owner was shouting out about his wares before he left to eat them. Naruto ate his food in peace behind one of the few shinobi equipment stores this village had. This one was the only place that would sell him clothes, and yet it was only the bright orange ones he had gotten used to wearing. Naruto made a mental note to switch up his wardrobe to something more appropriate, given shinobi were meant to be stealthy. Bright orange was not a stealthy color. Once he was done eating, he once more activated his stealth ability and walked into the store. He did chuckle a bit since it was one of those places that had a door with a bell over it to allow the person working at the moment to hear that someone had entered, so he saw someone come out from the back area to greet a customer after hearing the bell jingle. Only to not see Naruto since he was invisible through his ability. Once the man went back towards the storage room in the back, Naruto walked over to where there was a large rack full of kunai, looking back to make sure that the man manning the store was not there to see him. He then began to pull out the kunai from their slots and stored them away in his inventory, while he probably didn't need all the kunai he was taking. This was slightly personal since the people who ran this store would always sell him such low quality anything including kunai, so he was just taking what he paid for and they refused to give him. Once he had cleared out the rack, which was about 100 kunai, he then left the way he had come. He could only wonder how the man working right now would explain so many kunai being stolen. But that didn't concern him in any way. Now that he had what he needed, he set out towards his destination, which was known as the Forest of Death. This place was a large forest that was surrounded by a tall metallic chain link fence to keep the beasts within it inside of it. It was used in the various chunin exams that the village would host from time to time, since no one came here for anything other than those exams. It was perfect for his training. Sure, there were deadly creatures that could spell his demise if he wasn't careful, but he was confident he could handle them, given he had dealt with far worse when he was in his past life. These were not magical beasts, just normal ones, so he could handle them. Once outside the forest of death, Naruto looked around to see that no one was there, and once he was sure that the coast was clear he climbed over the fence and hopped back down on the other side. He dusted himself off as he walked further into the dark place, and once he got far enough into the forest, he then stopped. "Well, I might not have my gear from my past life," said Naruto to himself, "but now I wonder if my old shadows are still available. I could surely use their assistance for the future. Arise." To Naruto's chagrin, none of his old shadows came out like they would usually do. This sucked, but to be honest, he kind of expected this. Well, it was true that he had once acquired the Shadow Army of Ashbourne when he was given the full power of the Shadow Monarch. This apparently was different since it was a new dimension as well as time. But while he didn't have his old massive army of shadows at his beck and call as he once did, he did still have 3 that arose out of the ground. Out of the 3 that appeared before him, only 2 were humanoid, while the third was the fox demon that had tried to eat him, albeit far smaller than it was before. Right now it was the size of a bear at most, which was still pretty big. All 3 of his minions bowed to him, but well, that was to be expected since this happened even in his past life. Naruto couldn't help but question just where the hell the other 2 shadows had appeared from. The fox demon he could understand, since when he unleashed his power, it killed the thing sealed within him, but so far he had not killed anyone as of acquiring these powers again. He wasn't near any gravesite that he was aware of since the people didn't bury their dead in the forest of death, so summoning up the shadows of the long deceased was out of the picture. He ordered the man of the 2, with the other being a female with what he would admit was beautiful hair which was a dark red color, like black, but with a dark red tint to it, to lift his head so as to see just who he was. What he saw made him fall backwards onto his ass, since it surprised him that much. Shadows, well, they might be bright blue or purple skinned, still retained definable features that they once held when they were alive, so Naruto looked at this man and easily saw the face of the infamous 4th Hokage Minato Namikaze. How he had acquired such a legend as his shadow, he had no fucking clue, since he knew where the man was buried and he had not gone in that direction since getting his powers back. How was all Naruto was able to manage to say as he saw the man he admired so much kneeling before him as a literal shadow of his former self. Naruto actually felt guilty over this and held out his hand to release the man from his service out of respect, but before he could do so the shadow spoke to him. "SSO son," was all Minato's shadow was able to say. He was having a hard time speaking, which didn't surprise Naruto, since many of his past shadows suffered the same effect, but that one word had stopped him dead in his thoughts as well as his tracks. "What did you just call me?" "Son," said Minato again, but more clearly this time, Naruto-san. Naruto waved his hand, doing so sent all 3 of his shadows away. He wanted to be alone right now, since this was not how he expected things to go today. To be honest, he had not expected to remember a past life where he fought against godlike people for the fate of humanity, before he was reincarnated either, but that was besides the point. That random bit of info that he had heard felt like a puzzle piece to a puzzle you just couldn't find for so long after putting it together finally being placed into its proper spot. Things began to make so much sense for him now. With his added intelligence after his power was unsealed, he understood genetics far better than he did before. He was a blonde-haired blue-eyed kid, and last he checked the only blonde-haired people in Konoha were from the Yamanaka clan. He obviously wasn't part of their clan, since he was alone on the streets with their members attacking him like the rest of the citizens that made up this place. So that left the one other person who had the same characteristics as he himself had. He knew the story about the Kyuubi, since who in Konoha hadn't heard about Minato's great victory over the beast, so that told Naruto that the demon he had slain within himself when he had unleashed his power was in fact the Kyuubi. This made him beam with pride for a split second, since he had apparently done what even the great Minato Namikaze had been unable to do and killed the damn thing. He didn't know if his personal hero and potential father would be happy about that or jealous, but he wouldn't think too hard about it. Even with all these facts presented to him, there was still that inkling of a doubt that he had, and he needed to squash it for good measure, and luckily for him he had the perfect means to get the answer he sought right now. In fact, he couldn't ask anyone since he knew that they would lie to him in some manner. His increased intelligence helped him understand that he was being manipulated, since it was so obvious with a more mature mindset like he now had, so the higher-ups would not be of any aid to him, so he would go the direct route, since in all honesty that was the only one he had to take now. In school, what little of it he was allowed to attend, since the teachers were always finding some means to kick him out of the place one way or another for various reasons. They had gone over ever so briefly on the subject of seals. He knew there were basic ones that clans used to seal up their homes that were genetic in nature, so only those of the immediate family could activate said seals. Minato was known for being a seal master, and as such his home was sealed to this very day, since the man himself had been dead for years now, so Naruto would go and see if the seal would activate from his touch. If it did, then he would know without a shred of any sort of doubt that he was in fact the son of Minato Namikaze. So with a set destination in mind, Naruto set off towards Minato's home, although he was a bit irked about coming all this way towards the Forest of Death, only to have to leave it not much later, without really doing anything sort of training. He did manage to kill a rabbit on his way out and make a shadow out of it, given he could swap places with his shadows. It would help in the future since he knew he was going to come back here, so now he had the means to skip the long walks between both places. It took a bit to get to his destination, which wouldn't have been so long if he had activated his stealth ability, but so much was going through his mind right now, so it only dawned on him as he got closer to Minato's house. He did activate it as he got closer though, since he didn't want people to see him come in this specific direction when he got there. He saw that the house itself was firmly intact, but the yard was like a miniature jungle. The grass was so high he could easily hide in it if he so wanted. He walked up to the front gate and saw the seal that kept the gate shut and the various traps that made up the defenses of the place active, so with held breath. Naruto placed his hand on the seal and felt as if some sort of energy passed through him. It lasted about 2 seconds before he heard a click, signaling that the gate had unlocked itself. This one action alone proved without a doubt that he was related to Minato Namikaze, but now was not the time to fanboy on that bit of information, so he quickly entered and closed the gate behind him so no one could follow him. Once through the gate, he trudged through the miniature jungle that was his front lawn and made it to the front door. He opened that up easily enough since the door to the house itself was not locked, just the gate was. He walked inside his rightful home and closed the door behind him. He looked around and saw everything was covered in a lot of dust, but given no one had been inside this place in the last 7 years, it came as no surprise that it happened, since there was no one to clean up in so long. Naruto's first instinct was to flick on the lights, but he stopped himself from doing so for 2 reasons. The first was that he was easily able to see in the dark, apparently being the monarch of shadows gave him perfect night vision. The second, as well as the far more important reason, is that he didn't want people to see the lights on from the outside. If they did, that would tip off the higher-ups, who he was dead certain knew his parents' identities and would put 2 and 2 together. And they would try and come after him, plus given there were the Yamanaka clan who had the ability to not only enter the minds of people, but erase their memories as well, and it would not end fondly for him if he was captured. They would make sure that he remembered not a damn thing by the time they were done with him. So he began to see just what sort of home he would have lived in if his parents were still around to take care of him. Well, he knew about who his father was, he had no idea who his mother was. He thought hard on who Minato was married to, but he was drawing a blank since they never talked about her, just Minato himself. He saw this place had a large kitchen. The door that led towards the basement that he would check out later, 3 separate bathrooms, a master bedroom, 2 guest rooms, and then he came towards a bright blue door that led to the last room of the house. He opened it up and saw a room that was painted bright blue, but with clouds and leaves painted on the walls as well. In the center of the room was a baby crib, one that never got used. Naruto walked up to the crib and felt sadness sink into his heart. This would have been his if only his parents had still been alive to this day. It was at that point that he looked up, and what he saw made him cry a bit. On the ceiling of the room was a full mural that showed Minato and his wife, who Naruto recognized as the female shadow he had summoned back in the Forest of Death. Holding a wrapped bundle, he could only assume the wrapped bundle was supposed to be him, since there was no head to it, but instead there was a mirror that was aimed at the crib itself, so his parents didn't paint a face, since they had no idea what he would look like upon birth, but the mirror was actually a nice touch. Naruto couldn't help but cry harder as he saw this, since this was literal proof that his parents cared for him. No parent would go through this much effort to make a room appealing to a toddler if they wanted said toddler to suffer like the people of Konoha had made him suffer for the past 7 years. But as he stood there with the tears in his eyes, he began to think hard on what he had gone through, and the more he thought about it, the angrier he got. It got to the point where his anger went to full-on rage, and even then it still did not cease to grow. And eventually, Naruto's mind snapped. He didn't scream out in rage or anything like that, no, he began to laugh hard, but this laughter of his was not one of joy or happiness in any sense of the word. This was the laughter of a sadistic insane man. "They stole from me my childhood," said Naruto through the laughter as he was still fighting back the tears. "They were planning on robbing me of my home, my history, my very future itself. They tortured me for years without any thought of ramification. Well, Konoha, allow me to show you the error of thinking that way. Well, I am not ready to seek vengeance as I am right now. Give me some time and I will see this place destroyed, and when it happens I won't feel 1 single ounce of guilt as you all burn in the hell of your own making." And with that, Naruto stopped laughing, wiped the tears from his eyes, and set out to get the first good night's sleep he has ever gotten in his life. 6 months later. The past 6 months have been heavenly for Naruto. He stuck to a strict schedule of learning as well as training, and it showed given his large arsenal of skills he has acquired in time, while the seal that had kept his abilities as the Shadow Monarch was weakening, and it showed with the amount of strength that Naruto had gotten, which was not normal for a now 8-year-old to have. It was still not his full potential since it was still there. Every day was the same thing. He would use his stealth ability to sneak around the village and steal the food he would need for the day. It wasn't like they were going to sell it to him, even if he had the money, since they always upped the price on the things they sold to him, and even if he could pay they would give him the garbage they were about to throw out anyways, so he had no qualms about stealing food. Once he got the food he needed, he would head back home and eat a hearty breakfast before he descended into the basement. There under the house was a vast library of scrolls and books of all sorts. It was here that he learned about his family history, mostly his mother's side, since his father was an orphan like himself. He learned his mother's name was Kushina Uzumaki. And that she was not some random whore like the various villagers kept telling him his mother was for years. She was in fact one of the strongest kunoichi in the village at the time. He read about the clan he was from, the Uzumaki, and began to learn everything he could about them. He was an extremely fast reader, so he was able to go through so much in such a short time. It had taken him the 6 months leading to this point to read everything in this place. Once he finished reading them, he placed them in his inventory, since he planned to preserve as well as share said knowledge in the future, either with a student of his own choosing or a family he would start in the future. Only time would tell which route he went. Speaking of his family, he had released his parents from servitude as his shadows. Never would he use his own family like that, since after reading the journals the two of them kept he knew that they would have loved him dearly if they had lived to raise him. While Naruto couldn't quite understand why his father would seal a powerful demonic beast within him as he had. He was sure there was a good reason for it that didn't involve the extreme amounts of torture the people of the village brought upon his person. While reading, he did find something interesting within all the scrolls and books. Strangely enough, it was a token that was hidden in a scroll. The token was made of strong metal and had a hammer etched into it. The scroll it was inside was a thank you note sent to his mother, stating that the blacksmith she had saved was grateful and owed her one weapon forged free of charge, with the token being proof of that. Naruto pocketed the token, since it would most likely come in handy later, especially since the man who gave her the token was none other than Muramasa Sengo himself. The man was a legend when it came to making blades, but apparently his blades were cursed as well from the rumors. Those who he made blades for died violently in the end. Maybe that was why his mother Kushina never redeemed the token to get a blade forged. After reading up until noon, he would then eat a big lunch and then swap places with the rabbit shadow that was within the forest of death and begin training himself there. He punched trees to harden his bones. He ran for miles around the place and he did non-stop push-ups as well as sit-ups along with pull-ups. He worked his body to the core. And it began to show since his body was no longer thin and sickly looking as it had been in the past. Now it was the body of a fit 8-year-old child. While he did train in the forest of death, where many deadly beasts were known to prowl, not a single one of them ever attacked him. Animals were smart and knew an alpha male when they sensed one. They felt that messing with this child would end with their deaths and so went out of their way to stay hidden from him. This worked for Naruto, who wasn't aware of this since he didn't really care. In his mind he was just lucky as all. While many of the jutsu he read within the library inside his house he could not use, mostly since his chakra had been converted to magical power so he no longer had chakra to use. He did learn to duplicate some of the more complex things he saw. One of the biggest changes with his reincarnation was that when he was just Jinwoo, he had no elemental magic of any sort. He had made shadows for that, but he himself did not have such abilities to use himself, but now he did, yet while he did have elemental abilities now, he only had the elements of lightning and wind to use. Not bad really, but he would have liked fire as well, but beggars can't be choosers here, so he would accept this. His magical abilities that involved elements were quite numerous since what he could do with it was mold it in a numerous amount of ways or just flat out toss it in various forms, such as balls or spikes. The best way he used it was by amplifying his weapons such as his fists or his kunai. He would get a better, more proper weapon in the future, but he used what he had access to right now. Yet while Naruto was hidden away from the public eyes of the village growing stronger, the village was going through some drastic issues without him there. Hiruzen had noticed Naruto's disappearance within a few days after he had unsealed his true power, when he ordered one of the few shinobi whose job it was to observe the brat to find him, so as to plan another attack on his person. The shinobi came back and told him he was unable to find Naruto. This bit of information confused Hiruzen, since how do you lose track of a 7-year-old child who has barely been taught to survive in the world? So he ordered more men to look for Naruto and to not return until he was found. His men searched everywhere the brat frequented. They went to the orphanage he stayed at, but given the cheery mood of the woman who ran the place they knew he wasn't there since she hated the boy so much. They went to his favorite ramen stand, the one where the owners poisoned the brat on the orders of the various council members, the playground, the training fields, abandoned buildings. Even the various alleys all over the village and they found nothing. At this point Hiruzen grew as worried as he did angry. He called in a man known as Danzo, who for years had been telling Hiruzen that they needed to turn Naruto into a mindless tool of a shinobi so as to control him better, but Hiruzen knew that Danzo meant for Naruto to be controlled by Danzo alone. Hiruzen had ripped into Danzo, demanding to know whether or not the man had kidnapped Naruto himself, but Danzo had repeatedly stated he had not. It was then at this point that Hiruzen began to sweat bullets, since they needed to find the brat, and they needed to find him now. The loss of a Jinchuriki, and the one who possessed the strongest Biju of all things, would be a loss they could not recover from. Hiruzen called an emergency meeting with the village heads, all who knew about Naruto and loathed his existence, as other than a tool for them to use in the future once molded properly. Hiruzen told them all that Naruto was missing for the past several days, and they needed to find him. It was also at that meeting that a vote was taken to go with Danzo's idea of controlling Naruto once found, since it was clear that Hiruzen's plan had failed. If the brat had escaped their sight for so long, Hiruzen was against it, but in the end he was outvoted. So now there were even more people searching for Naruto, not only within the village, but outside of it too, since if he wasn't anywhere in the village he must have left it. If only they knew he was still within it in the one place they could reach him. But as so many people looked for him, Naruto got stronger and smarter with the knowledge left to him. But as he trained his mind and body, he knew that his time within this place was coming to an end. He knew that as long as he stayed here that he would never truly be free, since those in power would do absolutely everything to keep him under their boot, and he wouldn't have it, so he pondered on just what to do. He saw as so many people ran past him to try and search for him. Since they were very vocal about it, they didn't see him since he was using stealth, and so he was invisible to the naked eye. He knew that if he wanted to leave, he would need a distraction of some sort, and it would have to be a big one at that, since they were already looking outside of the village to find him. If they caught any sight of him they would send the cavalry and try to force him back here against his will, so he needed a plan that was not only a distraction, but somehow weakened the village as a whole, so they didn't have as many shinobi to send out after him, since they would need to protect their village instead. It was at that point that a thought came into his head, and it was a wicked one at that. He had the perfect idea as to what to do to escape, and now all he needed was the materials to set his plan off without a hitch. 1 week later. Fugaku Uchiha was not having a good day. To be fair though, he hadn't had a good day in quite some time, really, ever since the Kyuubi attack about 8 years ago. Ever since that damned beast attacked Konoha, his clan had been the social pariahs of this place, and it had only infuriated him as time went by. After the nine-tailed demon fox's attack, the village somehow connected dots out of thin air and accused the Uchiha clan of orchestrating the attack, as they did not take action against the tailed beast. That was such a large leap in logic, it made him question just where in the hell they had come up with it. This random situation, combined with the Uchiha being relocated further away from the village, caused a rift between the village and the Uchiha clan after so many years. Despite this, there were still some of the villagers that still admired Fugaku and the Uchiha clan's efforts of maintaining peace within the village as their main police force. But time and bitterness over losing the position as Hokage to Minato Uzumaki of all people made him conspire to cause a coup d'etat that would allow the Uchiha clan to take control of the village out of spite. Minato Namikaze, that name alone causes him to spit out of anger. How Fugaku hated the man. During the Third Shinobi War, he had gained infamy as a fierce warrior on the battlefield, with all the praise and admiration that it came with, but then it was dwarfed by Minato single-handedly ending the war with his fucking Hirshin Jutsu. Kami, damn it. If only he could get his hands on that technique, he could easily overshadow what Minato had done, but it was locked away in the now dead man's home with no way to get it. The protective seals that were all over the property still worked, and so no one could get their hands on what was inside the house. He was supposed to become the Hokage, not that fucking orphan of a man who had no clan name to back him up like he did as an Uchiha. His own sources had said that was the case, and the only reason it changed was that the people of Konoha wanted the strongest to take the position, and a man who could single-handedly slaughter so many enemies with a single jutsu was indeed perfect for the position. Fugaku loathed to admit that the people were right, and he still refused to admit it to this day. 8 years ago, when Minato had died defending the village, he had hoped that he would finally gain the position that had been taken from him, but then Hiruzen took up the mantle once more, which only infuriated Fugaku more, but at least Fugaku got his enjoyment out of putting Minato's brat in his place. He knew who Naruto's parents were, all the clan heads did. They just didn't care, since as a Jinchuriki his life was set in stone as a weapon to be molded and used as the village saw fit. It amused Fugaku, so to see the offspring of one of the most powerful shinobi of their age being put in his place at the feet of his betters. Hopefully Minato saw this in whatever afterlife there was, and if he did, he so hoped that dead fucker was crying his eyes out about how his poor brat of a son was suffering and he couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. But over the past few months, Fugaku had found others within the Uchiha clan who were like him in being sick of the attitude the village had towards them. Since the Kyuubi attack years ago, they were convinced little by little to join in a coup that would make them the top clan, as well as run this village, and eventually the entirety of the clan was in on this plan. It had taken quite some time. With Kami blessing them with the means to keep the plan secret, since Hiruzen was diverting so many shinobi in an attempt to find Naruto, since he had been missing for the past 6 months, today was supposed to be one of the last meetings to solidify the plan, and so the main players were in the meeting hall of their clan to discuss things in secret. None of them noticed the young man, the very one Hiruzen had been searching the past 6 months for, walk around the perimeter of the hall and place seals all over the building. They were too busy scheming to notice the young man come into the hall itself from an open window on the roof and sat on a beam looking down upon them, overhearing everything they were saying. But what they did notice was when the air started to smell a bit funny. At first they couldn't quite place it, but then the air started to change into a greenish color, and they knew that they needed to get out. But when they tried to open any of the doors or the windows to get out of the poisonous gas that was becoming more visible, they were shut tight via the seals on the outside of the building. The Uchiha clansmen and women tried desperately to get out, but no matter what they did they could not get out in time, and one by one they fell over dead from the poison they inhaled. Eventually all there was Fugaku, who was coughing heavily, with his vision blurry. He did see though as someone fell from the ceiling and began to walk towards him, while his vision was blurry. He would recognize that blonde spiky hair anywhere. "So this is how the Uchihas die," said Naruto with a chuckle, "not in some grand battle that will be spoken about for years to come, but alone and isolated by poison. How fitting of an end." Lenato's cough brat coughed out Fugaku since the poison was getting to him and it was hard to say words. "How are you alive?" "Oh this," said Naruto as he used his hands to send more poison towards his nostrils as he breathed it in heavily. "I ingested the antidote before I set this trap up, do you want it?" said Naruto as he pulled out a small vial of purple liquid and put it on the ground between him and Fugaku, "Then crawl for it like the dog you are." Fugaku seethed at being insulted like this, but he would deal with it once he took the antidote. He managed to weakly crawl towards it and grab a hold of it before he uncorked it and drank the contents, but instead of healing him, it in fact caused him to puke blood violently. "Oh," said Naruto with a sadistic smile, "did I mix up the antidote with a vial of concentrated non-aerosolized poison, my bad." Fugaku could only weakly glare at him a bit with an outstretched hand, so desperate to use it to strangle the life out of this brat, but he then fell face first onto the ground and died like the rest of the Uchihas had. "Well, step 1 is complete," said Naruto with a laugh. Well, it was true that he had made the poison, which did in fact have an antidote, since the book he read about it and said so. He didn't need it at all, so he didn't make it, since there was no point. He was completely immune to poisons, one of the many great perks from being the Shadow Monarch. Now on to step 2, arise. Out of the corpses of the Uchiha he had just poisoned to death, their shadows began to arise up out of the corpses that littered the room. After a few seconds of them being summoned by their new master, they all bowed towards him as one to prove their loyalty to him. "Oh, the irony of this," laughed Naruto hard, "since you all did so much to hurt and hate me for years, to see you all bowing on your knees to me is quite a sight, but enough about that, time is of the essence here, hear me my shadows. I give you one simple order to complete, leave this room, go out into the rest of the Uchiha district itself, and kill every last one of your former clan members, spare none, I don't care if they are weak, sickly elders or newborns, kill them all." The shadows didn't even hesitate for a second after hearing this and left through the open window Naruto had himself come through. As they went to complete his order, he walked out the front door and began to cackle to himself. Well, it might make him a monster to order the deaths of even innocent children, like he was doing right now. He was simply doing as he had been taught all his life. The people of this village showed him it was perfectly fine to ruin the life of a child if you hated them enough, and so since he hated everyone in this Kami-forsaken village with every fiber of his being, it was perfectly legal given the lessons learned. The things they did to him should have killed him. But it was the demon that was once inside him that kept him alive all these years, so he was simply returning what they had done to him. As he walked towards the edge of the Uchiha district, he saw his shadows all return one by one. Since their mission had been completed, he sent them away as they returned since they were not needed for the time being. Once they were all sent away to await for when they were summoned next, he turned around and summoned up several balls of pure electricity. This caused a few things to light a flame within the houses, and soon the fire began to spread. He launched them into several of the now vacant houses, and then turned around and began to walk away again. While he walked away, he did walk near someone he didn't expect to see. Sasuke Uchiha. Apparently the young Uchiha had been away doing something elsewhere when the massacre of his clan was happening. While at first Naruto thought about killing him, instead he decided to let him live. Don't get me wrong, this was not an act of mercy in any sense of the word, this was in fact the complete opposite. What little Naruto knew about Sasuke was enough. The boy went to the same class as he did sometimes. On those occasions he wasn't kicked out for some dumb reason. The boy was arrogant and believed he was the best since he was not only an Uchiha but the younger brother of Itachi Uchiha himself, a shinobi with a fairly impressive record himself. Naruto cold blamed Sasuke since his ego had most likely been stroked by his now deceased mother and father, so that he truly believed he was the best. Naruto could only smirk since Sasuke was about to get a cold hard realization that the Uchiha weren't as great as they thought they were. And now were dead as well. Before Sasuke noticed him, Naruto activated his stealth and walked past him. He couldn't help but solidify this moment as one that would haunt Sasuke's memory forever, so in an eerily haunting voice, he began to sing a eerie song. Oh, death. Oh, death. Won't you spare me over till another year? Sasuke heard a strange voice sing this song and looked around him as he heard this. While Naruto's stealth ability could hide his presence, it didn't hide his voice. The song made the hairs on Sasuke stand up since it was fairly disturbing to hear, especially since there was no one around him that he could see, so after slightly freaking out about hearing that song out of the blue, he picked up the pace a bit and continued onwards home, all the while unaware of what he would find there once he got there. But by the time Konoha saw the smoke from the houses lit aflame or went into lockdown as they tried to stop the fires from spreading, Naruto was already walking out the front gate. And without so much as a look back he took his first steps towards a new life, a better life that he deserved. It was a place you either really loved or just straight up hated with every fiber of your being. There wasn't really an in-between when it came to this place, and for Naruto he was of the opinion of the latter. It had been several days since he had left Konoha for greener pastures, which made him chuckle to think about since he left an actual green area, since there was forests and trees there, and here he was in the fucking desert. Within his first day after leaving his former prison, he found his way by pure luck towards a small town. It was the kind of place that was there so that merchants and travelers had a place to eat and sleep for the night. Luckily it had a place that sold clothes, and since he took the money that was in his home, which while it was quite a bit it was nowhere near the full amount that was located within two separate banks, he had the funds to purchase some new clothes that were his size. It wasn't much, but he bought darker clothes along with a cloak to cover his head, and while it helped to blend in so as to not be noticed as he traveled towards his destination, right now it was only making the already unbearable heat even more so since dark colors attract heat. He had a map so he knew he was going in the right direction to where he wanted to go, as well as had plenty of provisions such as water that he purchased and threw into his inventory to store for later. He could have gone around this desert, but the quickest way to any set destination is a straight line, and unfortunately that meant passing through it other than going around. It had been a full day and a half, and he was hating every moment of this, but eventually he saw what at a distance seemed to be a small town, but the closer he got he saw that it was in fact a large village surrounded by a massive wall. He checked his map and could see that he had made his way to Suna of all places. It was hard to tell he was coming towards this place since he had no landmarks to see while traveling, but now that he found himself in a shinobi village of all places, with it being one of the major five, this presented a good opportunity to acquire more proper gear before he set out further along his journey. The guards at the gate let him through since he was a kid. What could a kid really do? If only they knew just who they let in. But once inside, Naruto asked for directions to a few places to gather the things he would need. The first place he went to was a shinobi attire store. There he got his measurements done and custom ordered proper clothes that he would use. He got himself some clothes that he used to wear back when he was Sung Jinwoo, when he went to fight the ants at Jeju Islands. It was comfortable as well as functional along with a hood which helped to hide his face when he needed to do so. Once he put in his order and paid for it, he was told it would take a few days to make his clothes. He then went to a store that specializes in selling raw material for whatever you might need to build. In this case what Naruto needed was chakra metal, and a lot of it, since he was planning to make something with it. While the metal was expensive given the rarity of it, he was more than capable of paying for it, although it did drain him of most of his money that he had on hand. Then he went to get more provisions to replenish what he had lost while walking here, and then once he had all of that done, he went to the first restaurant he had ever gone to. Sure, there was the ramen stand, but that wasn't a restaurant like this one was. No one here threatened him, sold him garbage that was barely edible in any way, or beat him within an inch of his life before throwing him out. He ordered what looked good on the menu and ate it with gusto, with a kami-given smile on his face. Once he was done eating and he paid the bill, he then began to walk around since now that he had nothing left on his list of things to gather, he didn't really know exactly what to do. He was new here, so he had no idea what to do in this village, but as he walked about aimlessly, he did notice that a lot of people were giving space to a random young boy of all things. It was strange to see this. But it took Naruto a few seconds only to figure out why this was the case. The people of his own village had gone out of their way to do the same, with the only ones to approach him being the various people who wanted to hurt him. He saw the young red-headed boy with eyes that showed he had not slept in so long. It was strange seeing this from a third-party perspective. So with nothing else to do, Naruto decided to follow the boy discreetly so as to strike up a conversation. It isn't every day that you meet someone who shares your burden, even more so when that burden includes a massive demon being sealed inside you. So for the next hour or two, Naruto followed this young boy, and he saw the kid go through a lot of what he did with the isolation, yet no one was trying to attack him in any way. It actually seemed like the people were afraid of the kid for some reason, which was the complete opposite of Naruto's childhood as a Jinchuriki man. If only the people of Konoha had feared him like this, it would have made his life so much easier. True, he would be alone and live in essentially isolation, but given either, it would have been that or the horrific life he was forced to actually live. He would have taken the loneliness any day. The boy had finally made his way to a playground on the edge of the village near the massive wall that protected this place. There were kids and their parents there, but the second he showed up the parents all took their kids and left the area. Seeing as he was alone, it seemed like the perfect time to talk with him in Naruto's mind. "Hello there," said Naruto in a friendly manner as he walked towards the red-haired child, but he wasn't able to say anything else since the kid, without even looking at him, launched a tendril of sand at him. Naruto held up his hand and used wind magic to stop the sand short of reaching him in a manner that it dispersed away from him, like a barrier was there in front of him. This actually caught the boy's attention since now he actually looked at him, and boy, the anger in his eyes said a lot on the matter. "You will not kill me," was all the kid said before he launched even more sand towards Naruto. Naruto raised an eyebrow, since that statement came straight out of left field, since he had not come here to kill anyone, but now was not the time to think about it, now was the time to protect himself from harm. The boy did see that his first attack had failed to produce a corpse, so he sent even more tendrils of sand at Naruto. Naruto could only sigh at this, since it was kind of stupid in his mind, since all he did was expand the wind he was using, so as to protect a wider area from the sand. "If launching sand at me didn't work the first time," said Naruto in a voice that basically said hey stupid with its tone, "why would you possibly think that throwing more would do any better?" The boy did not respond with words, but he did growl as he lifted his hands above his head. Naruto felt the ground beneath him tremble and knew he had to move, so using the wind he was using to block the now dispersed sand that was sent his way before, he launched forward faster than the boy could react to and punched him square in the face with enough force to not only knock him out cold, but launched him back quite a bit as he landed on his back. "Oh crap," said Naruto to himself as he saw what he had done fully. He had been going on instinct and had not meant to really hit the guy that hard. Please tell me I didn't just kill him. Naruto ran over to the young boy's side to ensure that he was okay. He had no intention to kill the guy, just get him to stop trying to kill him. Naruto kneeled down to see if the boy was still breathing, which thankfully he was, but before Naruto could do anything else to help the boy, he felt a sudden influx of power surge out of the kid, knocking him back a bit. Naruto saw as the sand in the immediate area began to swirl around the young boy, taking the form of some sort of what he was guessing was a raccoon of some sort, yet only half of one since it covered only half his body, and it was off-putting since it wasn't exactly one side fully covered, but bits and pieces of it that equaled half of it. Naruto didn't know if he had some sort of OCD or the like, but this weirded him out a bit. "Of course," said Naruto to himself with a sigh as he took in all that had just happened. "He was possessed just like me, why didn't I see this coming?" Naruto saw the boy monster hybrid look at him with eyes that only showed insane amounts of rage. It then threw out its hands toward him and blasted a literal wave of sand at him this time. "Again with the fucking sand," shouted Naruto, who at this point was sick of the sand. Apparently walking through a literal desert of the stuff wasn't enough for him to suffer through. Now he had some sort of sand demon possessed boy throwing more of it at him. He knew he needed to dodge the sandy tidal wave coming at him, and thankfully he had the means to. He ran towards the merry-go-round that was about a few yards away from him and kicked the bottom upwards so that it was uprooted from its part that made it spin in place. He then held it with both hands and felt as the sand hit it full blast with enough strength to force him to skid back several yards himself, yet other than that he was unharmed. Thankfully his training had given him enough strength to hold on. The second he no longer felt the sand being sent his way, he placed his hands flat onto the metal surface of his makeshift shield. Once firmly in place, he used the magical electricity he was capable of using to keep them firmly in place before blasting a massive burst of wind behind him, thus sending the large metallic disc towards his opponent with him on it, as he expected. The boy with the demonic power he currently possessed used some means to deflect the projectile by launching it upwards somehow, which was what Naruto was hoping for. The boy didn't know he was now above him since he was scanning everywhere but upwards as soon as he was at a proper angle. Naruto kicked off the destroyed merry-go-round and launched himself at his opponent full speed that was enhanced by a blast of wind. Naruto's plan was to grab the boy by the head and shock him enough to knock him out, but what happened was not something he expected in the slightest. Apparently whatever seals or chakra technique that kept the demon sealed within the boy was no match for Naruto's magical power since, instead of grabbing the boy's head, he literally ripped the head of the very demon the boy was possessed by and ripped it out. The demon screamed in pain since its head had literally been ripped from its host, but Naruto was only shocked for a split second before he continued on with his initial plan to force his opponent into submission through makeshift electrotherapy, so with a full charge of lighting magic. Naruto held the demon's head down and pulsed it into said demon's head. The demon screeched to the point that it popped Naruto's eardrums from being right next to it, but it mattered little, since this pain paled in comparison to the numerous tortures he had faced in the past. Naruto didn't let up until the creature no longer screeched and remained silent. It took less than a minute, but in the end the demon was, for lack of a better terminology, brain dead. Naruto began to breathe heavily since the amount of energy he had to use to defeat this thing drained him. It only went to show that even though he had been training for so long, he still had a long way to go before he could regain his full strength like he had in his past life. Since the demon was defeated and the immediate threat stopped, Naruto did look back to see how the boy was doing. He was surprised to see the boy slowly walking towards him like some sort of zombie with his hand outstretched towards him. He never fully made it though since he fell face first onto the ground with his arms still outstretched in his general direction. Naruto saw as the head of the demon shifted into sand and said stream of sand flowed back towards the boy he had ripped it from. Naruto braced himself for more of a fight, but nothing else happened. Naruto knew that if he stayed here, that would lead to a lot of problems if the events he had to go through were proof enough, so he hastily left the immediate area and headed towards an inn that he had been planning to stay at this entire time while here, once he was in his room after paying for it. He pulled out a glass bottle from his inventory that was filled with a red liquid and grabbed the cork, keeping it sealed inside the glass container. Before chugging said liquid down, he felt as his eardrums healed themselves back to their pristine condition and then sighed in happiness. During his training deep within the forest of death, he had had an epiphany of sorts. In his past life, he had used the system to buy his health and mana potions, but there was that one moment that he used it to craft an elixir to cure his mother of the comatose state she had been stuck in for years. Well, it seemed like the system had been responsible. It did occur to him that he was able to still use the inventory, even when the system was no longer a thing when he had fully accepted Ashbourne's power as his own and became the new Shadow Monarch. This had made him wonder if he actually had the ability to brew potions on his own, so he had searched for the proper ingredients, and lo and behold, he had been able to make them. This had been a massive boon to his full recovery from the scrawny weakling he had been months ago to the more muscular boy he was now. So many times he broke a hand or a leg while pushing his body far beyond its limits, and so he would then chug a health potion and he was good to go after a few minutes. As Naruto rested in his room for the night, the boy whom he had beaten father arrived with more than a dozen of his most elite shinobi. The man had felt when his son unleashed the demon inside him and had quickly gotten the proper people to counter the threat, but to his surprise what he found was his son knocked out on the ground. This shocked him since the demon always took control whenever his son rested in any manner, so why it wasn't right now was nothing short of a mystery, so the boy's father had his men take his son to the hospital to be examined fully. Over the next several hours, the man would get reports that only stumped him the more he heard. Apparently something, or more possibly someone, had managed to stop the demon from taking control of its vessel when he fell asleep. He had no idea as to how this was, and he ordered his men to look deeper into this. But all they could find out about it was that the demon was for all purposes brain dead and as such was unable to take control anymore. The father was honestly pleased by this bit of news since it meant his son would no longer be able to go on a sudden rampage due to the demon's insanity. But he wanted his men to continue to look into this since he wanted to be perfectly sure that his son was stable in the end. For several days Naruto remained within the village to rest up as well as wait for his clothes to be made before he continued to trek through the desert towards his main destination, and the day he finally packed up to leave, the boy was discharged from the hospital as well during his semi-comatose state. The memories of his fight with the strange boy at the playground kept going through his mind. It was because of that stranger that he was now able to actually sleep, and dear Kami, did he need it, since insomnia had begun to set in and it was affecting his mind in a very negative way. What he wanted most of all was to find the boy and thank him for this gift. And it was by pure chance that he saw Naruto walking through the wall that protected Suna as he headed out. The boy saw this and then began to chase after him. The guards had tried to stop him since he was still the son of their leader, but the boy used his sand to sink them up to their chests so they could not hinder him. The boy did eventually meet up with Naruto, who was a very fast walker. He got Naruto's attention by calling out to him. "Huh?" said Naruto in confusion since he didn't know he was being followed by someone like this. "Oh, it's you, so how are you doing?" Very well, said the boy with his arms crossed, I wanted to meet you in person so as to thank you, and I am lucky that I saw you as you were leaving. Why would you thank me? I knocked you out, and last time I checked people didn't thank others for that. I am not sure on how you did what you did, or even what it was that you did, but whatever it was you did, it quieted the voice in my head that kept me awake. Ah, said Naruto, in understanding since now the pieces were coming together in his mind. Well, I am glad that I was able to help. You don't seem to understand the depths of my thanks, said the boy. The thing that whispered to me was driving me crazy. It told me to kill everyone and everything around me, and without sleep, I was slowly starting to listen to it. No one would be friends with me because of this. My own brother and sister avoided me because I was turning into a monster. You saved me much more than you know. Well, what can I say, said Naruto with a smile, since he was genuinely happy that he was able to help someone who suffered in a way that was similar to him in the past. He held out his hand towards the boy to shake. What are friends for? He left that last bit open so the boy could say his own name. Friends, huh? Asked the boy with a smile of his own as he grabbed a hold of Naruto's hand and shook it. I would like that very much. My name is Gaara. Can I have the name of my first friend? Me? Said Naruto with a goofy grin. I am Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Well, it was nice to meet you, formerly Gaara. I have somewhere I need to go, but if I ever find myself in Suna again, I'll make sure to drop by and say hi. Naruto then began to walk away from the village once more, as he had been in the first place before Gaara stopped him. As he did, Gaara stood there and watched his only friend walk away and wondered just when their paths would cross once more. But there was one thing that was needing him as he stood there, the names Uzumaki as well as Namikaze. He could have sworn he had heard those family names before, but for the life of him he couldn't remember where he had, so he turned back towards the village to go and ask his father. It would be years before the both of these Jinchuriki would cross paths once more, but even though time would pass by, the friendship they formed in that one meeting would last a lifetime. Weeks later, Iron Country. The lone man, tall but a bit overweight, stood at the edge of the field he had just finished tilling. It was getting to the point of time in the season when farmers would plant seeds into the soil, so he had loosened the ground so as to do so. He leaned on his hoe and took a swig from his canteen to cool down. He swallowed the last of the water that was inside it. And he knew he would need more, so he decided to take a break from farming and go to get more from his house, so he planted his tool into the ground so he knew where to walk back to and began to walk towards his house. He whistled a tune to himself as he walked, and as he did he remembered the simpler times when his family was still there for him. The memories made him a bit sad inside, but he shoved that sadness down as he got closer to his home. That didn't really work since the memories of his family started to become more real in his mind to the point that he saw his wife and son running around the place as they did what they usually did, but those were just hallucinations of the past and they weren't really there anymore. He walked past a separate building that was in the backyard of his house, a forge he used to work in for years until he hung up his hammer for good, but as he walked past it, he could still hear the panging of metal as he remembered vividly how he used to forge blades in the past, but he was no longer a blacksmith, he was a farmer now. He walked around his house to get to the front door and saw a young man in black clothes sitting on his porch, and that surprised him a bit since he didn't really ever get visitors here. It was actually nice since he didn't really like to deal with people in general. He did see that the boy was drawing something on a scroll, but what it was he did not know. "Hello there, young man," said the farmer as he got closer towards his porch. "Can I help you? Are you lost?" "No, I'm not lost," said the boy as he rolled up the scroll, "but you can still help me though." "And how can I do that?" asked the farmer with a raised eyebrow. The kid's response put him a bit on edge. "You're Muramasa Sengo?" asked the boy, "or do I have the wrong house?" "Indeed I am," said the now named Muramasa, "but that still doesn't explain how I can help you." "I have heard from many that you are one of the best blacksmiths around," said the kid simply, "and so I sought you out to forge me a weapon." "Ha!" laughed Muramasa since he actually found that statement funny. "If you know about me already then you would also know about my cursed blades. The same so-called cursed blades that are said to curse the wielder to a horrific death in battle. I have heard about that and to be perfectly honest that type of death would be perfect for me." "Well, I am sorry kid," said Muramasa in a more serious tone of voice, "but I am no longer a blacksmith, I am a farmer now." "I call bullshit." That random response caught Muramasa completely off guard since that was the last thing he expected the kid to say to him. "I saw how you reacted as you walked by your forge, and just from a third-party observation, I can tell that you still yearn to forge weapons as you did in your past. You think you know so much about me, don't you, Brad?" asked Muramasa in a bit of an angry tone. "I know what I saw," said the kid with a smirk, "and I know what I hear, and from what I heard from various sources, you are a man who always settles his debts no matter the cost." "Indeed I do," said Muramasa, who was now confused again. He thought hard about who he owed a debt to, and as far as he knew he never owed a kid a favor or any sort of debt, so why would this brat bring it up now? but what does that have to do with anything? Simply because I think we can help one another here, said the kid with a grin, one that Muramasa had only ever seen once in his entire life. The memory of a teenage red-haired girl came to his mind, but for what reason he had no idea. You get to break whatever oath you made to never forge again, and I get a weapon you promised my family years ago. Your family? Asked Muramasa, who was now even more confused, but that confusion only turned to straight-up shock when the kid pulled out a metallic token that he used his fingers to flip towards him. Muramasa caught it and looked at it briefly. He recognized it immediately. In all of his life, he had only ever made the one token as a means to remember a promise he made to a young woman years ago. I see that you recognize your handiwork. For the love of Kami, said Muramasa with a genuine laugh, I should have known you were related to Kushina of all people from your smirk. It is so similar that it is a bit disturbing to see. You knew my mother? Asked the kid. I knew her a bit, but not enough to tell others about her. All I can say is that she is one hell of a kunoichi, and she saved my life years ago, but after that day, I never saw her again, and I wondered why, to think that she would send her son to claim the promise I made. My mother didn't send me, said the boy with a shake of his head. Elaborate, said Muramasa as he looked at the boy with an analytical gaze of sorts. This had become a puzzle of sorts, and he needed the gaps filled to understand it fully. She has been dead for the past 8 years, said Naruto sadly, since it was still a tender subject to mention to just about anyone. He never got to know her, and it was an emotional scar that he was not sure how long it would take to overcome. Oh, said Muramasa in a concerned tone of voice. He knew that he needed to tread carefully so as to not make this depressing moment even worse for the kid, but 8 years. How old are you? I'm 8, said Naruto simply. So what you are saying is that my mother died the day I was born, said Naruto, who wanted to get past the subject, so I never got the chance to know her in any sort of manner. Sorry for your loss, said Muramasa, but if I might ask, who is your father? Minato Namikaze. Mina Minato Namikaze. Stuttered Muramasa in shock, since he was not expecting that. Most people had heard of how the man had won the Third Shinobi War, so to see the flesh and blood son of a man with such a reputation was not what he was expecting to see. Last time he had heard, the man had died protecting his home village, and so he didn't even know the man had a wife and child. But then that just brought up another question that he wanted answered. Why would the son of the fourth Hokage be all the way out here in Iron Country of all places? This country is not the most hospitable to shinobi of any kind. I am here seeking a weapon to defend me from whatever the world could throw at me, said Naruto seriously, and given the crap I have had to deal with, it only made me more prepared for it than any other 8-year-old should be. There is a story there, said Muramasa with a raised eyebrow, since he was genuinely curious as to what said story was. Care to elaborate? Jinchuriki. That one word caused Muramasa's eyes to open wide in disbelief. Well, it was hard enough to comprehend that the son of such an infamous shinobi was standing here in front of him. To hear that said child was also a Jinchuriki of all things was only added to the shock of it all. He had personally heard such horrific tales of what happens to the various vessels in their villages, the hatred, the torture, and the truly pure inhumane things they did to them. If even a minuscule fraction of the things he heard turned out to be a reality, he couldn't hold it against the kid to flee his home like he clearly had. Well, that explains pretty much everything when you think about it, really, said Muramasa as he stroked his chin and thought. And the kicker to the whole situation, stated Naruto with a chuckle, was that the higher-up straight up lied to my face about who my parents were, so it was only by pure chance that I learned the truth and left after I saw just how far they went to try and control me like they did. So the rumors that I had heard about how people treated Jinchuriki. I am not sure what rumors you might have heard, but I can assure you that I went through nothing short of pure hell every single day. Well, people laughed at my misery, my pain, as well as my screams were a sick, twisted game for them, since they would see just who could make me scream the loudest. There was no future in that place other than to live as a literal stress doll, so I left to find a better life elsewhere. And that led you all the way here of all places. Well, you are one of, if not the best blacksmith around, as I had read my mother wrote in her journal. She actually wrote that? Asked Muramasa, who was beaming with pride as he heard that. It was always nice to hear a compliment from time to time. Indeed she did, said Naruto, who was 100% lying right now. Other than being called an infamous blacksmith with apparent curses to his works, there was no mention of the man other than the token being a promise of getting a weapon forged by the man later in life that his mother had never been able to cash in. But he knew that he needed to butter this man up a bit by stroking his ego to get him to break whatever oath he made so as to not forge weapons anymore. So will you prove my mother's words as true and fulfill your promise? Well, said Muramasa as he looked at his left hand in deep thought. This had been his dominant hand he used when he forged, so it was like the memories of the past work he did lived on in his one appendage. I can't really go back on my own word now, can I? So I'll forge you your weapon, kid, but what type of weapon is it that you want? Naruto smirked as he tossed Muramasa the scroll he had been doodling in when he had appeared at his front porch. He opened it up to see what the kid had been drawing and had to admit the kid knew how to draw fairly detailed art. If being a shinobi didn't pan out for him, then with this much talent, he could make a living as an artist somewhere. What Muramasa was looking at was the design to the set of daggers he wanted forged. The memory of all the sets he used in his past life came to him, and while initially the strongest set known as Kamish's Wrath came to mind, but to be honest, he didn't like the design. While living as a hunter, it made sense to use them, since their magical abilities helped immensely. But in a world like this one where there were no magical weapons, or at the least none like he had used in the past, they weren't really practical, since their design was not really concealable or stealthy like he was. No, the blades he wanted forged was none other than a non-magical replica of his set of Demon King's daggers. It fit the situation well enough in his mind. All his life he had been called a demon due to the Biju sealed within him, who itself was the strongest of them all, which made it akin to a king of sorts, since Naruto had absorbed the beast when he had unleashed his sealed power. This seemed like the perfect set to use given his absorbed power. "This is a rather unique design," said Muramasa as he looked at the drawing. "Can you make it though?" asked Naruto with genuine curiosity. "With enough time I can make anything," said Muramasa, "but the issue is that I lack the proper metals to forge these weapons for you." "I had a feeling that would be the case," said Naruto with a chuckle. He then summoned the numerous ingots of chakra metal that he had bought back in Suna. Muramasa would have asked where the hell he had pulled the metal out from, but given shinobi were able to store various things in scrolls and the like, this was not all that surprising. "Seems like you came prepared," said Muramasa with a smirk. "Well, it is a good thing that you did, or otherwise this would take longer, but if I am going to break my oath to fulfill my obligation, then I am going to need you to tend to my fields while I work." "So essentially I have become free labor?" asked Naruto with a raised eyebrow. "Well, if that is how you want to see it. Well, I have no problems with that. It's not like I have anywhere set in mind as to where I am going after this, so I have nothing but time." "Well then, this will work out fine. You are more than welcome to stay here in one of the spare rooms I have until I finish my work." "Well, sweet Kami, all this time we have talked and never once have I asked for your name. Where are my manners?" "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," said Naruto as he stood up. Muramasa was opening the door for him to enter, so he would walk inside as he was invited to do. "Well, it is nice to meet you, Naruto. If you are anything like your mother was that day I met her, you have such a bright future ahead of you." "What exactly happened that day that you met my mother?" asked Naruto. The old blacksmith had mentioned that event a few times, and he was genuinely curious as to what had happened, given it led to said man giving his mother a token to cash in for a personally made weapon. "Well, let me brew some tea and I'll tell you." 1 week later. For the past week, both Naruto and Muramasa had been happily doing their own work, with Naruto tending the fields for the older man, while Muramasa spent his entire day forging the weapon that Naruto wanted him to make. The design that Naruto had given him was fairly detailed, so he wanted to get it perfect, since it was his way to do so as a blacksmith, but as they were doing their own things. In the distance a certain someone was approaching the house. And this certain someone was nothing but trouble. But let us go back, many years ago, to explain why this person was trouble. Muramasa had a son, or rather he has a son, but he is one the elderly blacksmith has all but forsaken for what he had done in the past. Well, the elderly man had questioned his life to understand where he went wrong in raising his son. It only became clear that his son was evil from the get-go, and while he had tried to help it was all for naught. Years ago, when his son, who was named Hikashiro, was born, Muramasa had been overjoyed to have a son to teach the family trade to like his father had done for him. He was there every day of the boy's life to love and hold him along with his wife. He saw the spark in his son's eyes as he showed him what it was that he did, and he knew his son would be a great blacksmith like he was. Oh, how time changed that. In the past, Muramasa had his forge as well as his home in the main village of Iron Country. He was well respected there, given the quality of his blades made him well known to all who came to get one forged by him. Even with the supposed curse that went along with them, people still wanted him to forge blades for them, but as his son grew up, he began to explore the village as a whole, instead of hanging around the house and watching his dad. This is where the problems began. Even within Iron Village, there were those who came from money who were not only arrogant, but were utter assholes to everyone because they had money, and they saw everyone else as inferior. There was one man in particular who hated Muramasa entirely for stupid reasons. The man was no warrior in any sense of the word, yet he wanted a blade forged by him. Muramasa forged blades only for warriors, since his blades were meant to be used for defense, not to be some decoration piece in some rich bastard's home, or to be carried only for show like this rich prick wanted. He tried every nasty trick in the book he could to try and get Muramasa to cave in and make him the blade he wanted. But it didn't work since he was too well liked by too many people, so he couldn't go that route, so he went another way. He used his son to bully Hikishiro, and over time his son dwindled down Hikishiro's mentality to the point he started to believe that money was everything. This caused problems between him and his father, given that now Hikishiro didn't want to be a blacksmith like his father, since he wanted to get rich so as to be, as he claimed, somebody. This pissed off Muramasa immensely, as he wanted to know why his son had become like this, so using the connections he had, as well as plenty of favors he was owed, he not only found out it was that rich asshole that corrupted his son into this form of thinking, he also used said connections to destroy the man's family business, as well as family itself. The rich prick was left without a single thing to his name, as his wife took everything when she left him for his brother. He later died trying to rob someone out of desperation, since he was stabbed by his attempted victim. Muramasa then moved his family to the farmhouse outside of the main village to get his son away from any future source of corruption. But even though the source of the corruption that plagued his son's mind was gone, the corruption was still there, far too deep to get it out. It was years later, when Hikishiro was 15 years old, that he did something that caused his own father to disown him. The fire daimyo had come to Iron Country for whatever reason, which Muramasa was not privy to, since he was not a higher up, he was just a blacksmith. The man had a thing for fancy swords like so many rich people before him, and he visited Muramasa so as to ask for the man to make one for him. Muramasa had refused like he did with every other rich asshole, who only wanted one made as a decoration. And told the man this. The fire daimyo was pissed that Muramasa wouldn't forge him a blade, but then he saw one that was hung above the door that led to the forge. He asked to buy that one, since it was such a beautiful blade, and since it was already made, Muramasa didn't have to forge him one. Muramasa grew angry that this man had even asked to buy his family heirloom. That blade was one that the first of his family to become a blacksmith, which then became the family trade, had made thousands upon thousands of failures to finally complete the only blade he ever perfected, and it had been the final blade he had made since he died soon after its completion. His son had stated that it was now a family heirloom and made sure that those who came after kept it sharpened as well as properly took care of it for generations. 700 years that blade had been in the family, with the head of the family taking perfect care of it. It was to this day as pristine as the moment it was first forged. The fire daimyo offered such a large price for the blade, which Hikishiro overheard as it was offered and came up with a plan to get rich quick, but by this point, Muramasa had enough of the fire daimyo and demanded he leave. The man growled in anger as he did, but knew he would get that blade one way or another. Several days after that altercation, Muramasa was greeted by the corpse of a man when he entered his forge. The reason behind this was that there was a simple seal on the blade that activated a well-hidden spike trap. If you were to grab it, no one knew it was there other than his family, since it was so well hidden. And so by this point Muramasa knew he needed to stash his family's heirloom away so as to not get it stolen. About half a year later, Hikishiro had found just where his father had stashed the blade. He had been told to work in the fields as a farmer so as to eliminate the whole money means you are better than everyone else mentality, but that was not really working, and his lust for money had not diminished since he was younger. So what he did was sneak into his parents' room late at night when his father was still working on a blade for someone and his mother was bathing. He opened up the safe that he had spied on his father to know the combination to and took the blade out. From there he went to his room and packed some supplies and clothes. He knew his father would know he was the one to steal the family heirloom, so he knew he would have to leave when he did this. So after his parents went to bed, he picked up his stuff and began to leave. At least his parents should have been asleep, but his father was just getting back after finishing the blade he was forging. He saw his son with all his stuff packed up and immediately knew what was happening, which angered him since if his son was old enough to believe he was ready for the world, he could have at least been man enough to tell his parents to their faces. But while this was the case, Muramasa was going to let his son go out and do his own thing. But before he could at least tell his son that he wished him good luck in any of his future endeavors, that was the moment that he noticed the blade his son was trying to hide. Swords were not really something that one can conceal in any sort of knapsack or bag, and even with it being wrapped, Muramasa was well aware of what a wrapped sword looks like. This made him question where he got it, since Muramasa never made him one, and there was only one sword in the house, other than the one he had just ma. His eyes opened in shock before they slitted in rage. He demanded that Hikishiro give him the blade now, but he refused, saying that the blade was his birthright. Muramasa rushed forward, and after a bit of a struggle which showed that even older he was stronger than his son, he took the blade back from him. Hikishiro grew enraged that his means to a lot of money was just taken from him, and so in his rage, he charged forward to try and get it back. Muramasa was able to dodge, since it was obvious what his son was doing, and so he could do so the issue here wasn't his son. The issue here was the exact moment his wife, Hikishiro's mother, came out of their bedroom. Hikishiro couldn't stop in time to not slam right into his own mother. The impact sent her backwards, and to make matters worse, she fell backwards towards the stairs leading downstairs. Both Muramasa and his son could only stare in horror as she fell down the stairs. Halfway down they heard a sickening crack that was the moment her neck snapped, her body hit the bottom of the stairs in a sickening thud, and Muramasa cried out for her in fear and sadness. As he descended the stairs, he grabbed a hold of her body and began to shake it, while the tears wouldn't stop flowing from his eyes. He kept telling her to wake up, but she was already gone. Ikashiro had been in shock about his mother's death, but then he saw the family heirloom next to him, since his father had dropped it in his mad rush to get to her, so he picked it up and began to run downstairs and past his father. Muramasa was not able to stop him, his grief was too great. But as Hikashiro opened the front door to leave, he did look up with a look that was a mix of pure rage with the tears to show it was rooted in sadness. "You disrespectful brat," shouted Muramasa through gritted teeth, "you killed your own mother for money, and you can't even say one fucking word in return. Have you any sense of shame?" Ikashiro had literally stopped as he heard those words, tears rolling down his own cheeks. This was not how he wanted things to go, he just wanted the heirloom to sell it, not kill his mother like he had. "You want our heirloom so much, brat, fine. Take it and sell the damn thing. I hope you are happy with yourself since now you not only have no mother, but you have no father either. Do you hear me, you piece of shit? I have no son." Ikashiro then ran out the door into the night and he would not return for years to come. But as he left and eventually sold the blade to the fire daimyo for a lot of money, Muramasa fell into a slump. He refused to make another blade and spent his days drinking in sadness. He buried his wife and then buried himself in alcohol. Day after day he was like this, and then one day he got so drunk that he began to walk out of Iron Country in the wrong direction instead of towards his home. There he was attacked by bandits who wanted his money, but he had none on him since he drank it all away, so then they were just going to kill him. But it was at this moment that a young red-haired teen came out of nowhere and managed to kill off the bandits. This was Muramasa's encounter with the Kunoichi Kushina Uzumaki. The woman had gone out of her way to see Muramasa to his home and made sure he got there in one piece. She would have left at that, but in his depressed state of mind, he began to cry and spilled the beans on why he was so sad. Kushina had stayed and listened to his tale, all the while understanding his pain. She had lost everything in the Second Shinobi War, given her entire clan was killed. With her being the last one alive that she knew of, so she told the man to live on, to find something to keep him moving forward, so as to push through the grief bit by bit until he no longer felt it. The man had taken her words to heart and had then offered to make her a weapon. Kushina was on a time schedule so she couldn't stay long enough to collect said forged weapon, so Muramasa made a token and gave it to her with the promise to make her a weapon in the future. Once she had the time and returned, she thanked him for it and then left. Unfortunately she never was able to return due to multiple events that happened outside of her control, as well as getting married and becoming pregnant, then she died so she could no longer claim her weapon. But while Muramasa found a new means to relive his grief in the form of farming after swearing off blacksmithing, Hikashiro was becoming a name known in the underworld. He took the money he had gotten from selling his family's heirloom and used it to start up a criminal enterprise that dealt with many things, drugs, prostitution, extortion, you name it, he did it. He even partnered up with someone like him by the name of Gato, another crime boss who terrorized the people wherever he went, but doing that was a mistake in the long run, since Gato was older and wiser when it came to running a criminal enterprise, so Gato stole everything from Hikashiro, leaving him with nothing but a few of his most loyal men who did not turn on him after losing everything. So here Hikashiro was with his men. Back where he swore never to return to after what happened all those years ago. Hikashiro needed money so as to restart his criminal enterprise once more and to get revenge against Gato, and he knew an easy source of money. Many rich people wanted a blade made by his old man, so his plan was to force Muramasa to forge a blade, take it, and then sell it to the highest bidder, and with his men in tow, he would make his former father forge a blade whether he wanted to or not. So let me paint for you the picture of the situation at hand. Inside the house, you have Muramasa, who was happily making himself some coffee since he was happy that he had not only finished the work he was commissioned to make, with the weapons he had finished forging being wrapped up for Naruto to open when he came back inside, but his love of blacksmithing was coming back to him. Maybe this was a sign to not give up on the family trade and to once more begin forging blades for other warriors. While he was happy doing his thing inside the house, Naruto was outside, jacket off, brandishing a scythe of all things, as he cut the wheat that was ready for harvest. It was a bit taxing for him given the fields were enormous and yet he relished in the work since it was an excellent form of training in a way, but while it was a great source of training for one's body, it was still a workout that made him thirsty, so he had a water jug to quench it whenever he needed to, but the issue now was it was nearly empty and he was just now chugging the last of it. So once he finished it off, he began his hike back towards Muramasa's place. Muramasa had just finished his own drink and washed his mug before putting it back when out of the blue, he heard a voice from behind him. "Hey old man," said the voice that caused him to mentally jump, though he didn't show it physically. At first he thought it was Naruto, but the voice sounded older, deeper, so that begged the question as to who the hell was behind him. He turned around, and within seconds of seeing who it was, his rage grew to heights he had long thought he was no longer capable of getting to. For before him stood none other than his disowned former son Hikashiro. You seethed Muramasa, since in his anger he wasn't capable of saying proper sentences right now. "Well, isn't this such a touching reunion?" said Hikashiro with a chuckle. "Get out," Muramasa said, finally able to say what he wanted fully. It was taking all his willpower to not just strangle the young man with his bare hands. "Well, that isn't any way to treat your son now, is it?" asked Hikashiro with a fake smile, all the while knowing his own father would not just sporadically change his opinion of him. He had been the cause of his mother's death, and not even time healed those wounds. "I have no son, so get out." "Not before you do something for me first, Pops," said Hikashiro with a grin. He then snapped his fingers, and from both sides of Muramasa, a man grabbed hold of him and forced him to his knees. Well, the man was strong in his own way, he himself wasn't that great of a fighter. Plus, given his older age and the fact these minions his son had brought to his house had about half a foot on him, and you can understand why he was so easily subdued. Plus, in his rage of seeing the one person he never wanted to see again, he was blind to the men who snuck up to him from the side, since he was suffering from tunnel vision. "Haven't you taken enough from me?" seethed Muramasa as he struggled to break free. "What more could you want?" "You see," started Hikashiro as he pulled a chair over and sat in front of his old man. "I am here to get you to forge a blade for me, so that I might sell it. Given your lack of forging nowadays, even with your reputation, it will sell for a lot of money, since it will be a rare item, plain and simple. You give me what I want, and it'll be out of your hair. Win-win situation." "No," said Muramasa as he glared at Hikashiro with all the hatred he held for the bastard son he had sired years ago. "I'm sorry," said Hikashiro in mock hurt as he heard the refusal to give in to his demands. "Did I hear you say no?" Hikashiro then kicked Muramasa hard across the face, making the man spit blood out the side. "Did you think I was giving you a choice in the matter? This isn't a negotiation. You will forge me a blade, or else this will become painful for you, old man." "Rot in hell," said Muramasa angrily as he collected it in his mouth and then spat his blood right onto Hikashiro's face. The feat was actually quite impressive given the distance, but even though that was the case, Hikashiro was pissed. For several minutes he continued to demand a weapon to be forged for him, and yet his father would continue to say no, and thus he inflicted pain on him, making sure to not damage the man's hands, since he would need those to do what he wanted. Finally, someone noticed the wrapped daggers that were on the table, and as the minion who saw them did, he let Hikashiro know about it. "Yo boss," said the minion as he held up the daggers while they were still wrapped up. You could see the hilts of them, but not the design itself. "Look at these." "Well well well," said Hikashiro in a mocking tone of voice, "isn't this a surprise? I thought you gave up forging weapons, old man, but look at you going back on your own morals, and you had the gall to lecture me on morality." That last sentence made Hikashiro pissed off and he punched his father right in the face, causing his nose to bleed from it. "The old man," said a voice from outside the room that had entered the house. "Did you finish up with my ord woe?" It was at that point that Naruto had come into the doorway that led towards the kitchen, and there he saw about a dozen men standing there with Muramasa of all people on the ground, looking fairly beat up. "Is this a bad time? 'Cause I could come back later." "Oh yeah," said Muramasa sarcastically since he couldn't help himself really. How do you walk into a situation like this and not see just how bad it was just on the face value alone? It was not that hard to tell what was going on. "We are just having a party. These men were just playing around." Of punched the old man in the face. "You don't have to be sarcastic, old man," said Naruto with a chuckle since his response was a bit humorous. "I'm not an idiot and can tell what is happening. Fucking youngsters and they're not understanding." "Oh, I understand plenty," said Naruto with a shrug. "Like for all I know this is just some hardcore BDSM session that you paid for, and I just came back at a bad time. I don't know what you do in your spare time." That response caused Hikashiro, who this entire time was wondering who the hell this kid was, why he was here in the first place, and just what to do with him right now, to just stare at him open-mouthed just like his minions, since that was not a response they would expect from a child of all people. Muramasa, though, was laughing hard to the point of tears, since it was genuinely funny to him. "But all kidding aside, wait a second," said Naruto as he saw the minion holding the wrapped weapons in his hand. He recognized the handles given they were weapons he had used a lot in his past life. It was hard to forget, given he was the one who drew the designs and had Muramasa forge them. "Not anymore, brat," said Hikashiro with a smirk. "They now belong to me. Now leave before I decide to get violent, and trust me when I say you don't want me to get violent." "So a man who is willing to hurt a child so as to steal what he wants," said Naruto to himself. "Well, that just makes this far easier in my mind." "Make what easier, brat?" asked Hikishiro in a condescending sort of tone. In his mind this kid couldn't do a damn thing to either him or his men and would only get hurt if he in fact tried to do anything. "Killing you," said Naruto plainly. There wasn't a hint of any sort of emotion in his voice. A certain Uchiha as well as a certain power-mad crippled man back in Konoha would have actually been fairly impressed by his lack of emotion that conveyed just how serious his statement was, yet though he was 100% serious as to his intentions. Hikishiro as well as his men all laughed so hard after hearing this. "You know what, kid," said Hikishiro as he wiped away a tear from laughing so hard, "just for providing my men and I with a good laugh, I am going to give you this one chance to leave without getting the shit kicked out of you, take it or leave it." "I'm not leaving without my daggers," said Naruto as seriously and emotionlessly as he had been before, "that is not up for discussion." "Oh, these daggers?" asked the minion holding them in a mocking tone that made the other men chuckle. The minion was fairly large with a muscle mass to go with it, so what could a child of all things do to this walking mass of muscle? "Well, if you are so determined to get them back, then by all means try and take them from me." "Oh goody," said Naruto with a sickly sweet smirk on his face. Muramasa actually felt a chill go down his spine as he saw Naruto make that face, since he had only ever seen it once in the boy's mother as she single-handedly killed a large bandit group. This did not bode well for the men in this room if history was going to repeat itself. A volunteer. "Wait, what?" asked the minion in confusion since that had not been something he expected to hear from the kid. "A vol." The minion couldn't finish his short statement since he was cut short. What cut him short, you might ask? Naruto had rushed forward, faster than anyone had expected him to do it, and full-on slammed his fist into the man's gut. The power behind it caused the man to cough out blood as he felt as though his body was bleeding internally. The shock of the situation caused the others to freeze, since this was not something they had seen coming. Rule numero uno in the art of the shinobi. Never underestimate your opponent, no matter how small or weak they might be. As the man had been hit with a gut punch, he had dropped the daggers he had in his hand, and in one fluid motion that seemed akin to some deadly sort of dance, Naruto whipped out one of the daggers and sliced the man's throat in a split second while catching the other while it was still wrapped with the other hand. He didn't need to practice using these blades in any way. He had already mastered them in his past life, now all he needed to do was use them. Hikishiro and his men were too stunned to do anything as the man whose throat was slit fell over dead with his blood flowing out of his neck. Naruto took this time to pull out the other dagger in the set and even tossed it in his hand a bit to get the feel for it. Finally their brains began to process the situation fully and did something. "Kill that fucking brat," shouted Hikishiro in anger about losing one of his only loyal men, as it was he couldn't afford to lose anyone since he needed those whose loyalty was secured if he ever was going to get revenge against Geto. Naruto had simply continued to smirk as the men rushed forward to do as ordered. Now if this had been a group of shinobi, trained ones to be exact, then his odds of winning would have been far lower, but given the fact that the men rushing him were simply run-of-the-mill thugs, albeit strong and big in height, with no real strategy on how to kill him other than to rush forward, this played right into Naruto's hands. Naruto met their advance and threw one of his daggers into the leg of the one in front, causing him to fall forward where Naruto stabbed him through the bottom of his jaw into his brain. He quickly removed the blade and dodged the baton that the next one used as he swung it at him, all while pulling the dagger out of the first dead guy's leg. Naruto waited for the idiot to swing again before he stabbed the man in the arm, causing the minion to drop the baton since his tendons had been punctured, but Naruto then proceeded to rip the blade out in a fashion that removed the hand entirely to the very bone. Given the angle of the cut, the bone was sharp, which Naruto then kicked hard enough so that the man's sharpened bone stub stabbed him in the neck. The others saw this and paused for a second, given this kid had not only killed two of their own, but had done so in a fairly graphic way that made them nearly hurl the lunch they had earlier that day. "What a bunch of pussies," said Naruto with a chuckle as he looked the men in the eyes. Their faces went white as they saw his eyes glow blue in a manner they had never seen before, and within those eyes, they saw nothing more than death. "You have the gall to try and kill a child, and yet you can't stomach a few dead bodies. Pathetic." Naruto then chuckled as he kneeled down a bit so as to get a running start for his next attack. The daggers he had made for him were made from chakra metal, which while he was not using chakra given his abilities were now magical in nature, it still was able to enhance the blades themselves if he were to infuse them, and this is exactly what he was doing right now. He was infusing his new daggers with electricity that caused them to glow from heating up, and the second they heated up to a bright yellow color, he rushed forward with enough speed as well as force to splinter not only the ground under his starting position, but the wall behind him as well. The men didn't have enough time to react to his attack since he sliced through all of their necks instantly, not only decapitating them but cauterizing their wounds so there was no blood gushing out of their wounds like the first three. Hikishiro full-on pissed himself in fear as not only were all his men dead at the hands of this brat, but he had thrown one of the daggers at the end towards him in a fashion that he felt it as it went whizzing by without actually hitting him. The second it left Naruto's hand, it cooled off instantly since he was no longer holding it to keep up the temperature. Hikishiro froze in place as he saw Naruto simply stand there, his arm out still after throwing the dagger at him, his gaze still meeting his own with the murderous look he had in the beginning still there. It took a few seconds, but Hikishiro pulled out a flintlock pistol he had hidden on him, but Naruto could see just how afraid the man was given his shaking hand holding the gun. "Sttt stay back," stuttered Hikishiro in pure fear, "I'll shoot." "Oh no," said Naruto sarcastically with a chuckle, "a gun, better make your one and only shot count." Naruto then took a sudden step forward, this action causing Hikishiro to freak out and pull the trigger of his weapon. The problem was that his aim was shit in his current state, so his shot was way off. Well, to be honest, even if he had aimed true, the bullet wouldn't have really done anything to Naruto given his abilities. "Now there is only one," said Naruto as he held up other hand towards Hikishiro. Hikishiro felt as if his throat was grabbed by some sort of force that his brain could not comprehend as to what was doing this. He clawed at his throat, but to no avail. This was Naruto's ruler's authority, and the only way to break free from it was to be either stronger than Naruto was. Which Hikishiro was nowhere near that, or Naruto himself stopped choking him. "You bastard," coughed out Hikishiro, who was trying so hard to break free from whatever was constricting his throat. "Poor choice of words there," said Naruto in an emotionless tone. "It is not a bright idea to insult the person who is literally choking the life out of you like you are. Case in point." Naruto then began to squeeze his hand into a fist, and as he did Hikishiro felt the grip on his neck get tighter. "Ah, Dad, help me please," gargled out Hikishiro, since he was trying his hardest to just breathe, and even then he was barely able to do that. His response, well, it didn't make Naruto lessen his grip in any manner, it did cause him to raise an eyebrow, since this was a bit of a large chunk of info to be just thrown out like that. "This guy's is you, son?" asked Naruto to Muramasa, who by this point was back on his own 2 feet, and even now he was still glaring at his former son. Hikishiro looked at his old man with pleading eyes begging him to call off Naruto and spare his life from death, but all he saw looking back at him was eyes filled with hatred for the past things he had done. Hatred for the waste of a human being he had become. "I have no son," said Muramasa as he walked out of the kitchen, fully knowing what was going to happen, even if he had disowned his only child for his past actions. Even after doing as he did and trying to make him forge a weapon for him via threat, Hikishiro was still his blood and he couldn't stand to see his death with his own 2 eyes. He knew that the son he loved and raised was long since dead, but he couldn't see this impostor die. It was only as he saw his father walk out of the room to leave him to his fate, only then did Hikishiro shed a tear of regret. He knew he deserved what was going to happen. This was karma for the lives he had ruined with his illegal enterprises, his killing of his own mother, and foremost shaming his family beyond any form of redemption. "Dad, please forgive." He didn't get to say any more since Naruto then fully clenched his fist, breaking the neck of Hikishiro and silencing his voice forever. As he finally let go of Hikishiro, his body fell to the floor with a loud thud. Naruto then placed his newly forged weapons into his inventory and went to find the old man. He found him outside, sitting on a chair on the front porch. Looking off into the distance, Naruto took his seat close, but not next to the man. "So," said Naruto simply after a tense minute of silence, "is there something you wish to talk about?" Muramasa simply grunted in response. "Oh, come on now," said Naruto seriously, "let us help each other here. You have a troubled past, and I have one as well. We can comfort one another by talking it out, given we are basically the same in this situation." Muramasa looked at Naruto for a long moment, wondering if he should actually speak about his past, but in the end he finally said, "Fine." And there the two of them spent talking about their pasts, and by the end of the day, with the sun finally fully setting, they felt better finally getting so much off their chests. 2 weeks later, hill overlooking the Fire Country capital city. Naruto stood on a hill looking down at the city below. So many things were going through his mind right now, with one of them being caution since he was back in Fire Country of all places, but he had a very good reason as to why he was here, and he still chuckled about what happened when he told Muramasa this. "Where will you go now?" he had asked weeks ago. "I plan to go and settle down for a few years so as to gather my strength," said Naruto as he was about to walk away from the old blacksmith's home. "But you seem fairly strong as you are." "True," said Naruto with a chuckle, "but given it is me versus the world itself, I will need more if I am to survive in it." "Well, there is no need for theatrics, boy," said Muramasa with a chuckle as well, since while he heard that phrase used before, no one really had to face the world. I am being serious, old man, said Naruto, since all 5 villages will want me for some reason. Iwa will want me dead for my relation to my father alone. Kumo will want me to be a stud to rape and make more of my own clan for them to train and use as soldiers, while I get no say in their lives. Kiri will want to kill me, given their hatred of bloodlines in the civil war they are going through. Suna is an ally to Konoha, who will do all in their power to make me submit. My life was nothing short of hell already before I left, yet they will make their past actions seem tame by comparison if they ever caught me again, so it is truly me against the world right now, and while I have the means to acquire the strength needed to survive, all I need now is time. Well, I wish you luck in your future endeavors then, said Muramasa with a smile on his face. Thanks, old man, said Naruto with a smirk on his own. I'm certain you will hear about me in the future, with some things being sooner than you think. Should I even bother asking what you mean by that? Asked Muramasa with a raised eyebrow. Nothing much, said Naruto with a shrug. There are just 2 well-known people I need to see before I settle down. Don't worry about it, y'all hear about it, I'm sure. I'm a bit concerned by that. Still, don't worry about it, said Naruto as he then set off with a wave of his hand. And like he had told Muramasa, here he was to meet one of those 2 he mentioned. Now, while you might assume he was here to meet some sort of friend or ally mentioned in either of his parents' journals he read through in the 6 months he locked himself away from the world, but no, that was not the reason why he was here now. The person he was here to see was no friend. He was the farthest thing one could be from it. But Naruto had an appointment to keep, and being late would be seen as rude. The sun was out, the people were happy with various merchants or traders selling their wares to the public. The trees were dropping their leaves to make the scene even more beautiful from an outside perspective. But the truth of it all was that this was all a facade to the true darkness that this place held. The capital city of Fire Country, known as the Fire Capital by the residents of said place, was a place that looked nice on the outside, but if you were to actually check you would easily see where the facade ends. It was like seeing a nice lavish home with a fresh coat of paint and freshly cut grass, but the second you walk in you see rotting wood, mold, and various other things that make you wonder just how the hell the house is still standing. Hell, even the citizens of this place knew the truth, but those who could do something about it, aka the rich, didn't care to actually do anything to fix it. The poorer people couldn't do anything, since the rich had the money and access to various people, such as mercenaries or even worse shinobi, who could simply make them disappear for good if they ever did anything that would upset the status quo from what it was now, and the biggest asshole who kept the lower class down like this, well, that would be the Fire Daimyo himself, and wold you know it, but as we speak he was parading down the main street. And when I say parading, I mean it in a literal sense, since he thought of himself so highly on that pedestal, that in his own mind his very presence needed to become a spectacle like this was. There were men holding banners to announce his group, samurai at his sides, waiting to deal with any sort of trouble that might happen. And trailing behind him were 2 young women whose sole job was to hold the back portion of his elegant robe so that it didn't slide on the ground. Yep, the epitome of being a narcissistic asshole. The Fire Daimyo was a man who was happy, since he got whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. It was his kami-given right as a ruler to take whatever his heart desired, and he abused that right his entire life as his father had before him, and his father before him. Yet even though that was the case, there was one thing he was denied in his past. And it was something that irked him to this very day, but there was nothing he could do about it, since the object of his desire was no longer available. But even with that small spot of a blemish on his perfect streak of getting everything he wanted, he was still having a good day. He had been too cooped up in his palace and wanted to grace the populace of his city with his presence, so he had come out today to do just that. So far nothing had happened that needed to be rectified. All those who saw him bowed to him, no one attempted to attack him. And there was cheering from the people, so very normal for now at least. But it wasn't until near the end of his route, which was by the main bank of the Fire Country, that was beside a restaurant that served him the perfect sushi, which they took meticulous care to do so, since the past several chefs that had failed to meet his expectations had all been well they weren't around to mess up his order anymore, and let's leave it at that. But he always made a trip towards the bank before he went to get his favorite dish of sushi, yet well you would think that he was there to see his own finances so as to gloat in the large amount of wealth he had accumulated via inheritance, taxing the people, and just stealing it from people, but that was not why he came here. Inside of the bank was one specific vault he salivated over beyond anything else. Inside of it were the riches that many people lusted over, yet not a single person could obtain no matter what they did. The reasoning for this was the sheer amount of seals that lined both the outside as well as the inside of the vault to make it impossible to break into. This was the vault of the Uzumaki clan. One of the richest clans to ever exist in the whole elemental continent, and only in Uzumaki could open it, yet they were all dead, so the means to open it up so as to obtain the riches within was lost to not only him but everyone else as well. Well, except one, and it was that thought that made the fire daimyo chuckle a bit since he had plans on how to break open this vault once and for all, but he would have to wait for his plan to come to full fruition. So after staring at the vault like he did from time to time, he left to go and get his sushi. It was exactly as he wanted it to be and was perfect in every way except one. The waitress presenting it to him was not radiantly beautiful like he demanded she be whenever he got his sushi, so with a quick hand motion, the samurai grabbed a hold of her and dragged her out the back with her crying and begging for mercy, yet her screams were silenced soon after. But the fire daimyo couldn't help but notice that his samurai had not returned. He motioned for another one to go see what had happened and said samurai went out to see what had happened, but he himself also didn't return. This irked him since they should have returned already, so with his final two samurai he himself went out the back to see why they hadn't returned. When he went outside, he saw nothing there other than a trash bin used by the restaurant. The samurai weren't there, but what did catch his eye was something in the distance. What he saw was a bench that was facing in his general direction, and on it saw a child with a hood on his head looking in his direction. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but the fire daimyo saw the boy stand up to leave, and in a split-second motion, he noticed the color of the kid's hair. A very specific color of blonde that he would recognize anywhere. But that couldn't be the case, for the person who had that color of hair was supposed to be under heavy watch in Konoha, so how the hell was said person here of all places? But before he could call out to the kid to demand he stay put, the brat took off down the street. The fire daimyo ordered his men to follow and detain the kid by any means, and so they took off after him. Naruto smirked as he sensed he was being chased now, since this was his plan in the first place. He was too fast for the samurai to catch up to, even with all the obstacles that Naruto had to go through, such as people who were out and about, but the shinobi who were there were another thing entirely. Naruto ran into a nearly empty plaza of sorts and saw 3 shinobi standing on the roof of a building directly in front of him. He knew they spotted him, and so he took a quick left and booked it in that direction down the street. He felt as something was thrown past him and saw as whatever it was exploded into what was essentially a wall of fire, so as to deter him enough for him to be captured. To them he was just a kid and wouldn't be stupid enough to go through fire, but guess what Naruto did? He jumped through the wall of fire without so much as stopping. He felt as the flames heated him up, but his magical power protected him and healed what little there was that needed healing in some way. Since they saw that their initial plan was not going to work, they took more drastic measures and began to throw explosive pellets. These were meant as a shock and awe tactic of sorts, but it still did not stop Naruto. One shinobi took to the roofs and got ahead of him before he dropped down and tried to grab him with his bare hands. Naruto didn't stop and dodged his attempt by sliding under the guy right between his legs. This actually caught the man off guard, since he had no idea that their target would do just that, so the chase continued. Naruto sensed as about 24 people were chasing him, so he turned suddenly down a narrow alley that was laden with random clutter, such as bins and boxes of various sorts. 2 of the shinobi were able to chase him down the alley, all the while Naruto was flawlessly maneuvering around all the obstacles in his path, but the alley did lead to a dead end, which the shinobi thought would make the brat stop, but it did not since Naruto simply hopped up onto the roof in one single jump. This caught them off guard, so much so that they comically crashed into the wall at the end of the alley. Naruto ran across the rooftop and jumped off the other side of the building, but this was unfortunately where the chase ended. One of the shinobi was a master of capturing targets alive, and as such had a portable net launcher that he used to catch Naruto in midair. Naruto struggled to get free, but it was in vain. So he was quickly surrounded and then released from the net before he was bound in cuffs. He was forced to remain on his knees for several minutes before the fire daimyo himself made his appearance. Naruto glared at the man, who could only look at the brat with utter disgust. "How is this brat here?" shouted the man at one of the shinobi. He was supposed to be under constant watch in Konoha. "What in the 9 hells are you shinobi doing?" The man then glared back at Naruto. "Take him to the dungeons and leave him there with the other convicts." "But sir," said one of the samurai in the group, "we have several dangerous individuals there already, one of which is a convicted pedophile." The samurai was stopped before he could finish his sentence. "Did I stutter?" shouted the arrogant man. The samurai knew better than to go against the orders of the fire daimyo and took the kid by the arms and began to walk him towards the dungeons that were on the palace grounds. While this was all happening, not one of them noticed Naruto's smirk as he was being led away. Everything was going according to plan. 1 hour later, underground dungeons. The samurai took Naruto as he was ordered to and uncuffed the poor kid. Once he was uncuffed, he had one of his men open the cell door that led to the large room that contained several people already. He then pushed Naruto into the cell and shut it back up before locking it behind him. He did open the slit at the top of the door and say a quick good luck, but other than that there was nothing. Naruto looked at his surroundings and saw where he was, imagine if you will, a prison yard with all the various groups and the weights to work out and the basketball courts. Now take out all the extra stuff and put that area underground, lit up via lighting from seals, ones that looked ancient, and Naruto wouldn't be surprised if they were made by the Uzumaki given the look of them. That was where Naruto was at this given point. Well, said a man, one covered in so many tattoos on his body, as he walked towards Naruto, looks like we got fresh meat boys, and isn't he such a tender morsel. I won't try and get fresh with me guy, said Naruto as he calmly cracked his neck and then his fingers, because this is not going to end well for you. Oh, said the man as he licked his lips in a very creepy manner, a fighter. I like it when the little boys fight back, their screams are so beautiful to hear as I take them. The man then lunged forward so as to grab Naruto, but Naruto simply held up his hand and flicked the man's fingers, this alone didn't seem like much. But the force of him doing so broke and bent them fully backwards in a manner they were now bleeding. Naruto then grabbed the man's arm and rammed it hard into the now screaming man's mouth. He got it in there as much as he could and then full on punched the man's elbow so it went deeper still. The pedo died from literally being fisted down the throat. Well, good news gentlemen, said Naruto with a smirk as his eyes began to glow bright blue as his killing intent increased. He summoned up his daggers into his hands and got into a fighting stance. You aren't going to rot in here, you are simply going to die here and now, so good luck in whatever part of hell you end up in. And then he rushed forward and began to massacre the convicts that were in the room. As he did this, their screams began to be heard by the few guards that were down the hall. The way this cell worked was that it was sound absorbent, so if they could actually hear screaming, that meant the convicts were screaming very loud. So about a dozen of the guards made it to the room and opened up the portion of the door to see inside of the room. The room was eerily quiet, as well as dark as night. Something had damaged the seals on the walls, so no light could be seen in the room, so the guards pulled out flashlights and opened the door before they entered it themselves. Their hands were on their various weapons at all times. And they were right to do so since the scene they were greeted with was horrific to see. The bodies of all the convicts they had in the cell were scattered all over the floor, and what made this scene horrific was the fact that not a single one of them was fully intact, as one whole body, pools of blood littered the floor with nearly as much splattered across the walls. One convict even had the head of another shoved into his chest. And that scene caused a few guards to puke since it was traumatizing to see. None of them noticed the figure moving up from behind them, but they did notice the second they heard the door to the cell slam shut. The guards shone their lights towards the door to see who had closed it and were surprised to see Naruto standing there, a creepy grin plastered on his face as they did, but his eyes were glowing blue in a manner that unnerved the guards who saw it. Naruto chuckled a bit as he held up one of his hands, two of his fingers were glowing blue as he collected electrical energy within them. And as soon as he had enough, which wasn't much given what he was planning to do, he then snapped them. This caused a miniature amp effect that made the guards' flashlights useless to them now, and while they were completely in the dark, Naruto could see perfectly well within it. And he capitalized on that fact by slaughtering the guards as easily as he had killed the convicts who had once inhabited this room not too long ago. Naruto had spent most of the time training in the Forest of Death with his magical power, trying to see just how far he could take it in a sense. He wanted to know the true capabilities he had with them, and one such thing was the ability to set off an imp-like effect in the immediate area. How far exactly? This he did not know since he had trained not too far into the forest to avoid most of the more deadlier creatures that called said forest home, and since he wasn't in the exact center of said forest his imp would affect the homes close to there, then Shinobi would investigate, and he didn't want that to happen, so he kept the range small. And while it was a fairly neat ability that was fast to activate, he didn't really see how he could use it all that well, given his enemies used metallic weapons, not electrical ones, so this did not help to disarm his opponents at all. Then there is the main issue of the effect is not specific in a way that he could pick and choose who was affected, so once activated, everyone around him was hit by it. Well, now he had found the perfect means to actually use the ability, and that alone had caused him to chuckle, since he had answered his own random question from months ago that he never really wanted or even expected any sort of answer to. It didn't take long for Naruto to kill the guards who tried in vain to fend him off, and once done, well, he then used his power to conscript their shadows into his forces. True, they weren't the best given Shinobi were stronger, but hey, they would make perfect meat shields if needed, really, so he would take it. Beggars can't be choosers when one was lacking manpower like he was right now. And speaking of manpower, Naruto summoned up the entirety of the Uchiha clan from the shadows and gave them one simple order. Eliminate every last samurai and shinobi in or around the palace, spare the staff by knocking them unconscious, but not the muscle, so they took off to do as their master ordered, and while they did that, Naruto went off towards his own destination to finish what he had come here to accomplish. Meanwhile, secret room near Fire Daimyo's bedroom. The fire daimyo walked out of his well-hidden, yet still known by the staff, which made you wonder just how the hell is it a secret room if the majority of the staff know about it, room that from the outside looked like the rest of the wall that was there. He was growling in anger as he headed towards his room to rest himself for the night, but he did take a few breaths to calm himself. He couldn't really sleep when he was angry, so he needed to calm himself. The room he had been in was one that was made specifically to talk to others in complete privacy as well as silence. The sheer amount of seals that were in the room made it so not a sound escaped said room, but it was perfect for conversations such as the one he had just had, hence the sour mood. In the room was a wall of monitors so as to speak with either a group of people from afar or just one like he needed at the moment. The fire daimyo had entered the room and turned the monitor on, the one that connected to Konoha directly. There was always someone stationed there, which was their job, one that was done in shifts and was considered so very boring by the ones who had to do it. The pay was low for what was basically sitting in a room waiting for the off chance that the fire daimyo would decide to call through the monitor. It rarely happened, like only 3 times a year at most, so after the monitor turned on, he looked and saw the shinobi on duty. The fire daimyo demanded, said shinobi to fetch Hiruzen immediately, which the shinobi left to go do. As he did this, the fire daimyo impatiently tapped his feet on the ground while he waited. Eventually, the elderly Hokage showed up as ordered and took a seat to speak to the fire daimyo as he told the shinobi to leave them alone to speak in private. The fire daimyo talked to Hiruzen at first about the goings-on in Konoha, all of which Hiruzen answered to the best of his knowledge, yet after several minutes of speaking about other things that had nothing to do with the actual reason he called, he finally asked the question he wanted to speak. "So how goes our plan for the Uzumaki brat?" The fire daimyo had clearly seen Hiruzen flinch as he had asked that, but he had composed himself just as quickly. Hiruzen had lied to his face and stated that the plan was going as was directed in the first place. The fire daimyo asked the same question over and over, and every single time Hiruzen lied to him. Finally the fire daimyo had enough of the Hokage's lies and straight up shouted at him for doing so. He told Hiruzen that Naruto was here in the capital city, nowhere near Konoha, so he wanted to know just how long the brat had been missing. Hiruzen had lost the color in his face as he heard about Naruto's whereabouts. But he told the man that Naruto had only been missing for a few weeks and that they had been searching for him ever since. The fire daimyo had been angry and told Hiruzen to come personally with his shinobi to come and collect Naruto, who was in the dungeon. There he would hear the full truth of the matter, and from there a proper punishment would be issued once he got the full story. He then shut the monitor off and left the room to head to bed. And it was here that we find the fire daimyo at the moment, alone, and in his bed. He had some tea prepared to help him sleep and he had just finally drifted off to sleep. The fire daimyo was having a pleasant dream, one he had multiple times for years. In it he had the brat he had locked up open the Uzumaki vault and out came a tidal wave of money. He would swim through it all the while laughing, and then he would make it to a boat that was harnessed onto the brat he took it from via spikes embedded in his back so they could not be removed. He then would pull out a whip and use it to tell the little shit to swim and pull his boat. All the while he would lounge on the chair that was on the boat with covering and servants to feed him while he relaxed. This was how the dream always went, and while a lot of it was physically impossible, given you can't swim through money like that. And while he hated the brat having such spikes driven into his back like that would be the death of him, and while one part of his mind would be alright with that, the other part knew he was still needed so as to serve him to his dying day as a tool to defend his country. But this night, the dream only went so far as him nearly reaching the boat before he was so rudely woken up with a headache of all things. His vision was groggy as he was forcibly awoken, but he shook his head a bit to clear his mind and then went to flip a switch near his bed so as to turn on the light, but he never was able to do so since his hand, both of them to be exact, were grabbed a hold of and he was pulled back flat onto his bed. He struggled to break free, but whatever intruders had him in their grasp were fairly strong and he couldn't break free from them. He tried to see who it was, but his room was pitch black since he had no windows in this room, so there was no light source to illuminate it for him. "Dear Kami," said a voice in the dark, which caused the fire daimyo's rage to surge, since he instantly recognized it the second he heard it. "The layout of this place is so what's the word for it? Bizarre. No, that doesn't seem like the right word, really idiotic. That is the word I was thinking of. This place's layout is idiotic. What is the point of a room that has no windows and only one door to it? In case of an attack there is no exit whatsoever and you can't see shit in the dark. Well, you can't, but I can see just as clear as day myself." The fire daimyo opened his mouth to scream at the boy in rage, but one of the men holding him down slammed his palm firmly over his mouth, so all that came out was a garbled, muffled yell that no one could understand what was being said. While he was doing that, the one talking to him in the dark illuminated the room in a manner he was not expecting. Instead of flicking the switch to turn on the lights like a normal person, said intruder held up his hand and in his palm formed a ball of pure electricity. The fire daimyo could not only see the illuminating orb that was crackling with electrical sparks here and there, but he could now clearly see the face of Naruto himself. And as he saw that the boy was smirking at him, it only fueled his rage even more than it had before, and he continued to try and yell at the brat through the hand, but failed still. Naruto was sitting on the edge of his bed cross-legged, just out of range of his legs, so he couldn't kick him. "Now I wish to have a civil conversation with you," said Naruto simply, "but given who it is I am talking to, that is more or less impossible, so let me tell you how this is going to go." Naruto then leapt forward and slammed the electrical orb into the chest of the fire daimyo. The man screamed out in pain as the electricity surged through his body. It only lasted about 3 seconds, but for him it seemed like a lifetime. "Every time you begin to yell, or you insult me, I am going to shock you, do you understand?" The fire daimyo was trying so hard to catch his breath from the pain he was inflicted with, but all he could do was glare at the brat who did this to him. He swore that once he got the boy back in the cell, he would ensure that not only would his stay in the dungeons become a hellish nightmare, he would make sure that the life the brat had lived up to this point seemed like heaven in comparison. But Naruto saw his rage through the man's eyes, and he didn't like that look in them, so he once more thrust the orb onto the man's chest. So now the fire daimyo was screaming again, but this time the hand was no longer there to muffle his voice, so his screams could be heard out loud, and boy was it music to his ears, but just like the last time it only lasted a few seconds. "I will ask slower this time to get my point across," said Naruto with a chuckle. To him it was funny to see the adult in the room act like this, while he, the literal child, albeit with the mindset of a far more mature person, given his acquisition of power and memories of his past life, acted more mature and calm. "Do you understand?" "Guards!" shouted the fire daimyo in rage that he was being subjected to such painful torture, and yet his guards had done nothing to stop this. What was he paying them for? "Oh come now," said Naruto as he plopped himself right on the fire daimyo's chest, cross-legged like he had been before when this all started. He then began to toss the electrical orb up and catching it as he spoke, "Use your head for a second. You had me thrown into the dungeons under lock and key with guards, and yet here I am. No one is coming to your aid when you are screaming like a little bitch at the top of your lungs, and everyone can hear this. This is a simple equation to solve in your mind, so solve it already. There is no way you killed my guards," stated the fire daimyo in anger. He had about 300 samurai in his palace at all times, so there shouldn't be any means to eliminate them all, other than a full-on invasion, but that would require an army, and this brat didn't have that. Oh how wrong he was. "Yet I am sitting here," said Naruto with a raised eyebrow, "so that should tell you otherwise." "Why are you here?" seethed the fire daimyo, angry about the whole situation. "Finally," said Naruto with a laugh, "we can begin having an actual civil conversation between you and me. As to why am I here, well you brought me here, remember? And not nicely in any shape or form, so blame yourself for this, given you were the one who technically invited me into your home." "Fine," spat out the fire daimyo, who was thinking to keep the brat occupied with their conversation, while if what he had said was true and his guards were in fact all dead, he still had shinobi from Konoha en route to come and capture this brat, so he needed to keep him here so as to allow them to arrive on time. "What do you wish to talk about?" "Honestly," said Naruto as he placed his fingers under his chin in a thinking manner, "just wanted to get a few gaps of information filled, and given they involved you, you should be able to fill those gaps easily enough. I'm at a loss here." "Understandable," said Naruto with a chuckle, "since it is out of context, but allow me to state that I know who my parents are, both of them." That one statement alone caused the fire daimyo's eyes to open wide. He had ordered Hiruzen to never allow this brat to know who his parents were. Hell, he had authorized the erasure of the history of the Uzumaki entirely, just so he would never figure it out, so just how did this brat do that? "Ah," said Naruto with a frown, "just by your expression alone I can tell that you didn't want or expect me to figure out the truth about my parentage, so it seems like the hatred for me goes way beyond Konoha itself. At least Iowa has a reason, being the hatred they have for my father, given what he did in the last Shinobi War. But you, the hatred you have is what puzzles me, given it makes no sense really, except in one specific situation." "I hate you because you're a Jinchuriki," said the fire daimyo with authority, which was ironic given his dire situation. "No you don't," said Naruto with a shake of his head. "I spent 8 years dealing with people who hated me for that specific reason, so I know what that feels like. Your hatred stems from something else, perhaps the loss of a loved one." That last bit caused the fire daimyo to nervously sweat a bit. "So it is that," said Naruto with a grin, "but who exactly is it that you lost? Your family is here in the capital, and you have no family living in Konoha. Hell, you don't even love your own wife and son, which is plain to see since they live in a separate home entirely on the outskirts of your palace grounds, while you live in the main house alone. So I am guessing that they were a combined marriage of convenience, as well as a child born to be an heir, so as to stop any problems in the future if you were to die. So if the loss of a loved one isn't family related, then it is someone you love that isn't family. At this point the sweat on the fire daimyo's forehead was thicker, he was too nervous to even speak. "See," said Naruto with a grin, "this is the gap in information I was talking about, since I had no real proof to say what it was, all I had were the journals of my dead family, and they had plenty to say about various things, and it was only after reading their journals that I began to piece this together. It's not a concrete fact, just an inference really, so allow me to say my piece. And you will help me fill in the gaps to complete the timeline, also don't lie to me, I hate liars, and I have had enough of them to last a literal lifetime, sounds good?" The fire daimyo didn't respond with words, in fact he grit his teeth and growled in rage that he was the one who was being interrogated like this, but he silenced his growling the second he saw Naruto's hand hold up the electrical orb in a position to strike him with it once more. It amused Naruto to no end to see the most powerful man in Fire Country shut the hell up because he was scared of a little pain, oh the irony given the situation. "Years ago, my mother was sent to Konoha for the sole purpose of replacing the former Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. The process was a success, and shortly afterwards, the Uzumaki clan was killed off by the combined might of 4 different villages. This is where we come to our first gap of information." Naruto looked at his captive with a raised eyebrow as he said that last bit, since after their deaths, "My mother went to investigate her former homeland and found out that the way they were killed was from several vital seals protecting the place were tampered with, thus not functioning properly and leading to the enemy breaking through and slaughtering my family. My mother always pondered just how that was possible, given no one else had the same level of seals that the Uzumaki had at the time, and yet their best seals were tampered with. She never got the chance to fully figure out who did this, but in her journal, she suspected Konoha had a hand in the death of the Uzumaki. So tell me dear Fire Daimyo, did Konoha betray my family?" Naruto glared at the man who cold looked him in the eye as Naruto stared deep into his own. He was sweating heavily, but he wasn't saying anything. Naruto though, he wasn't going to allow this arrogant fucker remain silent on the matter, so he motioned for his shadow to hold up the fire daimyo's hand so that he was still restrained, but Naruto could grab the man's hand if needed. Which right now he did. "Apparently you think that I am going to allow you to respond to my questions with silence," said Naruto coldly as he grabbed the man's hand. The fire daimyo actually shuddered at the brat's touch, since he couldn't break the grip that Naruto had on him. This shocked him since he wasn't able to break free from the grasp of a literal child. "But I demand a verbal answer to my questions, and every time you refuse to answer, well, you know what they say, actions speak louder than words." The fire daimyo didn't have any chance to respond to this since Naruto took one of his fingers firmly, and while you would think that he was planning to break it like a lot of torturers do, Naruto went another route that was far more painful and gruesome. Naruto straight up ripped the man's finger off his hand. The fire daimyo screamed in pain since this was far more painful than anything he had ever gone through before, and that included the orb Naruto slammed into his chest twice. His blood gushed out a bit from the open wound, but Naruto used his orb and placed it on the open wound to cauterize it so as to stop the bleeding. This somehow made the pain the fire daimyo was going through even worse, and he screamed louder than before. "This is what happens when you don't answer me," said Naruto coldly. "I will rip off one finger at a time, then I'll move onto your feet and remove your toes, then afterwards I'll just have to get creative with the removals, like case in point I can and will castrate you if need be, so answer my fucking question." "Yes," shouted the fire daimyo, who was trying so hard to overcome the immense amounts of pain he was still in right now. "Konoha betrayed the Uzumaki. How did they do it? Hiruzen ordered his student Jiraiya to tamper with the seals on the same day she was taken from Whirlpool. Why did he need to do that? They were allies, not enemies. The Uzumaki wanted to take the vessel for Kyuubi back after the war was over, but Hiruzen wouldn't allow that to happen. With the Uzumaki dead, then there won't be anywhere but Konoha for the present and future vessel to go. So greed, said Naruto with a sigh. Greed is what caused my extended family to perish years ago. Well, that just adds to my list of people to hunt down personally, but the list was short, so what is a name or two to add to it? Do you really think the fire daimyo never got to finish his sentence since the same hand that had silenced him before clamped down hard onto his mouth so as to silence his words? I don't think a damn thing, said Naruto with a smirk. I in fact know that I will get away with what I am doing now, as well as my plans for the future, but enough about that, now onwards with the timeline gap filling. So after Konoha betrayed my family, so as to keep the vessel for Kyuubi within their greedy clutches, time went by, the war ended and things went back to normal. But several years later, my mother was kidnapped by a group of Kumo shinobi. For what reason? Well, it seemed like the reason for that was Kumo doing its typical plan of stealing people for their bloodlines. True, all villages are guilty of this, but Kumo does it far more than anyone else. But their plan was thwarted by the man who would become my father, Minato Namikaze. It was through his journals that I learned more about that day, and it is there that there is another gap in information that I wonder if you could answer. What do you want to know? The way the world knows about it, it was Kumo who tried to kidnap my mother, but the thing about that situation was that the direction the kidnappers were heading wasn't Kumo, but rather towards the fire capital itself, and another thing that my father couldn't help but notice is that the men who did the kidnapping were missing Nin of all things. Now will you sit here high and mighty in your fancy smancy palace paid for with the ill-gotten gains you have acquired over the course of your lifetime, but there are certain facts that all shinobi know, one of the most important of all in this case, is that once you become a missing nin to your village, there is no turning back. You are given the debt on sight label and become nothing more than an easy mark for anyone wanting to cash in on the bounty they placed on your heads. Sure, there are some exceptions to this rule, being the complete overthrowing of the current ruling cage, but they are so rare you have a better chance finding a fucking unicorn than getting your label as a missing nin revoked. So if the men my father stopped from kidnapping my mother were in fact missing nin, see the picture I am painting here. It's a little abstract, said the fire daimyo painfully. Well, apparently fortune doesn't buy intelligence given how much of a dumbass you are, said Naruto more to himself than anything, but with the given facts, it was apparent that my mother wasn't kidnapped to be taken to Kumo. Oh no, that was simply a smokescreen to hide the real person responsible for the order to kidnap her, while making it seem like Kumo did it. So who in the fire capital would want my mother kidnapped? And better yet, what reason could they have to do just that? Any idea, your majesty? Naruto made sure to say that last bit as sarcastically as he could. Well, it was true, the man was indeed royalty, it meant fuck all given the situation right now. I have no clue who would do such a thing, stated the fire daimyo with a glare since he was really getting pissed off more than he thought possible. It was that increase in rage that gave him the balls to speak in an angry tone, instead of the fearful one he just had when Naruto literally ripped his finger off. Just because I am the fire daimyo doesn't mean that I know everything that goes on in this city. Naruto looked at the man for a good minute and a half with an empty expression. This caused the fire daimyo to freak out for various reasons, but then Naruto began to laugh hard, and I mean to the point of tears sort of laughing, but mid-laugh, Naruto once more slammed the orb of electricity into the man's chest and caused him to scream out loud once more. I told you not to lie to me, said Naruto with rage in his voice, since he wanted honest answers, and he was going to get them one way or another, and what you just said was a lie. You literally know everything going on in the city, since you have shinobi spying on everything and everyone, so as to eliminate anyone who so much as even thinks a bad thought about you. Your rule is stained in the blood of so many of whom were innocent, but you don't fucking care. Naruto then stopped shocking the man, took a deep breath and calmed himself since he needed to remain calm if he was going to get the answers he sought. If he was to just kill this man, he would never get them. Besides, said Naruto with a smirk, all while lifting up his other hand, this one glowing a purplish blue color as he did, I know it was you who hired those men to kidnap my mother, and the proof of such is right over there. Naruto then moved his hand through the air, like if one was opening a closet of some sort, as he did. The display case that he had that was filled with various jewelry he had taken from noble families as a tax, moved to show a secret room that was hidden behind it. While it was a common thing for rich people to have such things like panic rooms, secret passages to flee intruders, or secret rooms like the fire daimyo had here, it was the contents of said secret room that made this odd. Inside the room were various things that all followed one fairly specific theme. Each and everything in the room was something related to one Kushina Uzumaki. I am talking about old clothes that had been thrown out back to when she was 7 years old, and all the years in between then and the year she died, pictures that were taken in secret, gum she had chewed and thrown away, a picture of her and her husband, with Minato's face cut out and the fire daimyo's face there instead. The creepiest thing was that this obsessed man had managed to collect enough of his mother's hair to fashion a life-sized wig, one he placed on a statue that was so lifelike it was almost like the woman was standing there. The list went on and on to the point that the entire space was crammed full of things like this. Hell, there were even her used panties, many that were stained white, that made Naruto nearly throw up, since that was sick in not only his mind, but just about anyone's if they were to see this. Oh Kami, gagged Naruto as he tried his hardest to keep his vomit down. He didn't want to think about what the fire daimyo had clearly done to his deceased mother's old underwear, but in his mind he knew already, and it made him sick. You sick fuck, what is wrong with you? You would never understand love, Brad, said the fire daimyo in malice. He was pissed that his personal obsession with Kushina was exposed like this, and to her child no less. You call this love? Asked Naruto with a serious look on his face, cause I, and just about every other person on the planet would see this and see it as it truly is, which is obsession, that is not love. What the fuck do you know? Well, obviously the difference between love and obsession, but this does answer the main question I had for you. Why did you order my life to be a living hell like you did? The answer? Simple jealousy, not because I am a Jinchuriki like you and so many people in Konoha said, but because I am the living breathing proof of the woman you obsessed over so much, not only loving another man, but their loving blooming into new life, so that I might be born. She would have learned to love me. Shouted the fire daimyo, who at this point was just letting all his rage out at once. So that's what your big plan was? Stockholm Syndrome? Naruto saw that the fire daimyo was confused, which was understandable since this world never heard of such a thing. Well, he had due to his past life. Never mind that, but just so you know, my father knew about your one-sided love towards my mother. This caught the fire daimyo off guard since he had not expected to hear that out of all things. A man knows when another man is after his woman, said Naruto with a smirk, and so my father recognized the signs easily enough. Hell, my own father suspected that you were the one to send the Kumo missing nin to capture her, but he had no proof, so it wasn't like he could come out and accuse you. You would have just ordered his execution for slander, and then tried to kidnap my mother again. Hell, if I was alive then you would have had me killed no less, erase all traces of her former life, so that you could break her down into the perfect sexual object you wanted her to be, not to raise her up and properly marry her, which a normal sane person would do with the one they love. But to enslave and imprison, so that her whole life would be devoted to nothing more than pleasing you, no matter what you wanted from her, so I will reiterate that that isn't love, it is a sick obsession. The fire daimyo wouldn't meet his eyes, thus confirming everything that Naruto stated to be fact. The man was just too proud to say he was wrong here in any sort of fashion. Nobility, am I right? Well, that leaves all the gaps filled, so I have no more questions for you, said Naruto as he hopped off the fire daimyo's chest and stood up off the bed. He took the time to stretch a bit, since it had been a bit uncomfortable for him to sit as he had for so long. Man, if he was this stiff from sitting on top of the guy, he could only wonder how bad it was for him. Well, if you have finished what you come here to do, started the fire daimyo in the hopes that this brat would just leave and let him be so he could do what needed to be done, so as to capture him in the very near future. He would make the brat suffer 100-fold for what he had done to him. I'm going to stop you before you finish that thought, said Naruto as he held up his hand and waved a finger at the man. Did you really think that I would go through so much trouble like this to just let you live? I answered all of your questions. What more do you want from me? Vengeance, said Naruto coldly. What? Stuttered the fire daimyo in fear, the tone of voice that came out of the brat as he said that sent fear straight to his heart. One thing you need to know about my clan, your majesty, said Naruto as he used his hands to order his shadows to grab a hold of the man and stand him up. They did just that, and as they did, Naruto actually turned on the lights for the room, so he didn't need to hold up an electrical orb anymore. It wasn't draining much of his magical power, given it was small in size. But right now it was a nuisance since he didn't need it. We have a few creeds that we uphold to the letter. First, we care for our family, and we take care of our own. Second, we don't start fights, we simply finish them. And lastly, we always get even against those who do us wrong. You fit that bill so very nicely. You are a terrible leader who kills people for so much as looking at you wrong or not, fitting your insane standards of beauty like that waitress earlier. You knew the truth about my clan's demise, and not only tried to profit off it by stealing our money by most likely using me, since others can't open it, you sentenced me, a literal child, to a life of hell out of jealousy. And you would kidnap and rape a woman just because you wanted her. There is no redemption for you, so I must do what needs to be done for the betterment of just about everyone alive. The fire daimyo opened his mouth to say something, but all that came out of his mouth was a garbled mess, since Naruto had slit his throat with his dagger faster than the man could notice it. Naruto stood there with a grin on his face as he saw the fire daimyo's blood leak out of the deep wound and splatter onto the floor. The man's last vision was of the brat he hated so much standing there with that grin, and it was what Naruto wanted. He wanted the man's death to be poetic in nature. Once the man was fully dead, Naruto whipped out his daggers and twirled them in his hands. While killing the fire daimyo was a main portion of the plan he had coming here. There was still something he needed to do before he left right now, so with his plan in full swing, he ordered his shadows to go and get him some rope as he put his hands in front of him while forming a square with his fingers so as to form a picture in his mind. And dear Kami, what a grotesque picture it would turn out to be in the end. Some time later, Uzumaki Vault interior. Naruto had come to the bank earlier in the day shortly after the fire daimyo had made his frequent trip to it so as to lustfully gaze at the Uzumaki Vault with pure greed in his eyes. Once the coast was clear, Naruto had used stealth to move towards the vault and placed his hand upon the vault door. Obviously the seals immediately noticed his Uzumaki genetics and unlocked for him. He only opened the door a crack before he summoned up a shadow and ordered it to remain inside to use later. Now was the time that shadow came into play, since he used shadow exchange to switch places with it. The room was dark, but that was expected given it was a vast vault of all things, so there were no windows of any sort, otherwise that kind of undermines the whole point of a vault, which is that it is secure, so Naruto summoned up multiple orbs of electricity to illuminate the massive vault and looked upon his inheritance. What he saw made his eyes widen in surprise. As far as the eye could see, massive piles of gold and precious gems of all sorts. Hell, there was a diamond the literal size of his head in a case right in front of him. Well, now I can understand why so much effort went into trying to manipulate me to open the vault door for them, said Naruto to himself. Since this is a lot of money, I wonder how much this would convert to. If I was able to go back to my old world, man, mother would have a heart attack if she saw the sheer number of zeros on that check. Well, now it is all mine as it should have been from the start. Naruto then held up his hand and charged it with electricity in a manner that made it magnetized, so as the various golds and metals shot at him, they were stored away in his inventory, so as to take it with him for the future. It took a bit, but in the end all that was left in the room were multiple piles of gems, since those are not magnetic in any way. So he summoned up numerous shadows to gather the gems, and they took the time to do so. Once more it took a while, but now the room was empty, other than the seals that covered the entirety of the walls within the vault. To those who took the time and effort to make these seals, said Naruto as he walked towards the closest wall and placed his hand upon it, I am sorry, I will not allow anyone to copy their design. Naruto then channeled magical energy into the wall, and as it pulsed through it, the various seals that were once plastered all over it began to erase themselves from existence. Magic was sure handy when it came to things like this, since it was far stronger than chakra, so with his job done, Naruto left a single note on the ground dead center of the room before he chuckled to himself and then used shadow exchange once more to leave the vault towards his next destination. And while he did that, the shinobi that the fire daimyo had ordered to come to the palace were just within viewing distance from the capital itself. Elsewhere, unknown location near ocean. Naruto looked out towards the ocean and gazed at the massive pool of water. It was so calming to look at it like this even in the moonlight, and he was enjoying the time he had to just stand and enjoy the sight before him. These moments were rare, and he would enjoy any and all he could get, but as he stood there, he summoned up an item he had within his inventory so that he could look at it. The item in question was nothing more than a picture, but of who, you might ask? Well, that answer only pissed Naruto off as he looked at it. The picture was of one Tsunade Senju, aka Tsunade Uzumaki Senju, as in a literal living relative of his own clan, who wasn't there to aid him, aka his godmother, according to his mother's journal. And what a godmother she had turned out to be in the end. She had abandoned the village for the past 8 years and never once set foot back in it, so she could really do her motherly duties, such as raising him if she wasn't there herself. He had learned about her and her relation to him via his mother's journal. And he could still remember the rage he felt that day as he came to realize that he not only was abused, which in itself was bad enough, but he was abandoned as well, which only made the harsh reality he lived in far worse. Now, while his plans had been to kill the fire daimyo, which he had accomplished, he also planned to kill Tsunade as well. The woman was a disgrace to the Uzumaki clan name, and he would take the time to kill her himself, but his window of opportunity was closing fast, and he was not really one to gamble, especially when he had come so far in his plans. That was more Tsunade's shtick, and it would eventually come back to bite her in the ass once he got his hands on her. True, he could have just killed the fire daimyo quicker than he did and just be done with it all to save on time, but the sheer amount of horrific things that man did to not only his clan, but the very citizens of Fire Country itself warranted that his death not be quick, but rather slow and excruciating. There was also the fact that if he faced her now as he was, he would have to be stealthy in his kill since as he was, his power was nowhere near what it was in the peak of his past life, so he would train his body and mind to prepare himself. Ha, chuckled Naruto as he looked at Tsunade's picture. For someone known as the legendary sucker, given your reputation at losing so much while gambling, count yourself lucky that you have some more time to enjoy your vices. Your death will not be quick, and by the end of it, you will know deep down within your very soul that it was your own damn fault. Naruto then used wind magic to shred the picture into shreds before he blew them from his hand to the winds. Her face was forever ingrained into his mind, so the picture was no longer needed. Now, before I set out, there is one last thing to take care of. When Naruto had been in the secret room that the fire daimyo had filled to the brim with stuff his mother had from the past, there was one thing there that was not Kushina themed. It was a very well forged katana with the emblem that showed it belonged to Muramasa's family, so Naruto had taken it before he had set out from that place. So he pulled it out of his inventory and held it now in his hands. Well, it was a finely crafted blade, it was not his to wield since it was a family heirloom, as well as the fact he preferred daggers over full swords, so with blade in hand, he summoned up one particular shadow to carry out a specific task. This shadow belonged to Hikashiro. Naruto had taken his shadow after killing him, though he didn't take the ones from the minions, since they won't really do him any good. He wanted warriors in his personal dark army, not thugs like they were. True, Hikashiro was just like them, but he wanted him to do this task personally. "Take this blade back to your father," said Naruto as he handed it to the shadow. "There you will kowtow on his doorstep and remain in that position until he himself comes and takes the blade from you, then you will be freed of service, since I don't need a pathetic man like you under my control, you aren't even worth being a meat shield." Ikashiro's shadow strapped the blade onto his back and then ran off in the direction of Iron Country, as his master had ordered him to, and Naruto watched as he left before turning around to face the water once more. Naruto then summoned up the shadow of a shark he had his others kill, so as to ride it across the water. He did this by ordering them to dive down and kill one. It had been a question he had for a while, since while in his past life, he had been in various different worlds through the gates that plagued his old home, he had never dealt with any sort of underwater world. Strange to think about given he had been as places like underground frozen plains, hell even the fucking desert where he had to run for his life from giant worms when he was still so very weak. Apparently shadows didn't need to breathe, so they were able to swim underwater indefinitely, and any shark would easily be overwhelmed by a small army of people out to kill it, so the deed was done eventually. So once the jet black shark was summoned, Naruto stepped upon its back and ordered it to swim towards their new destination. Whirlpool, the home of his ancestors, the Uzumaki clan. And it would be here that Naruto spent the next 8 years fully training himself so as to prepare for the battles that lay ahead of him, for while he left that shore in the dead of night a simple boy named Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. He would return in time with a new identity that the world will say in fear. Thanks for watching.